The tiny wooden cross cast a long shadow across Robert Anderson's backyard as the evening sun dipped below the pines. 68 years old, with hands gnarled from a lifetime of carpentry, Robert placed a faded blue collar on the freshly turned soil. "Guess you were one of the good ones," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Behind him, the sound of paws on grass made him turn. Bella stood there, her once skeletal frame now filled out, watching him with those knowing German shepherd eyes. At her feet, two healthy puppies tumbled in play, oblivious to the small grave or what it represented. Robert glanced at his watch. 6:30 p.m. His son Michael would be arriving soon, the first family dinner in his house in nearly 5 years. How quickly life could change. 3 weeks ago, he'd been alone, waiting to die in an empty house. Then came that desperate bark at his gate. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Robert Anderson's life had shrunk to the four walls of his Lancaster County farmhouse. At 68, the retired carpenter moved through his days with mechanical precision. A man going through the motions of living without truly being alive. 5 years since Margaret's passing, and he still set two places at breakfast, still turned to share news with a woman who wasn't there. His weathered hands, marked by decades of honest work and a tour in Vietnam that he rarely discussed, now mostly tended to his modest garden and occasionally repaired things around the house that didn't really need fixing. The three-bedroom home where he'd raised a family now echoed with silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old timber or the soft padding of Max, his aging golden retriever. "What do you think, Max? Beans coming in good this year?" Robert muttered, kneeling in the garden with a grunt as his knees protested. The dog, gray around the muzzle, wagged his tail half-heartedly, loyal company in a lonely existence. Robert's son, Michael, lived 4 states away with his wife and 2 children, a 10-year-old girl and a teenage boy Robert barely knew. Their phone calls had dwindled to holidays and birthdays, awkward exchanges that felt more obligation than connection. He kept their photos on the mantel but couldn't recall when they were taken. The for sale sign had gone up last month. The house was too big, the property too much to maintain, the memories too heavy. 30 more days, and he'd be moving to a small apartment near the VA center. The real estate agent called it downsizing. Robert called it giving up. Each morning followed the same routine. Coffee for 2, 1 poured down the sink. Medication for his heart condition. Toast with the crusts cut off. Margaret's preference, now his habit, and the newspaper read front to back. Sometimes he'd turn on the radio for company, the old-time country music station playing songs from a more hopeful era. His small pension covered the essentials. His woodworking tools, once extensions of his hands, gathered dust in the garage. The flag from his military service remained precisely folded in the cedar chest, along with medals he never displayed and memories he rarely revisited. The neighbors meant well, but kept their distance. In rural Pennsylvania, folks respected privacy to a fault. Occasionally, Mrs. Delaney from down the road would bring apple pie, just because I made extra, but they both knew it was her way of checking that he was still alive. Robert's calendar was marked with doctor's appointments and bill due dates. Nothing to look forward to, nothing to plan for. The only unpredictability in his life came from his occasional nightmares, humid jungles and the sounds of helicopter blades that left him gasping in the dark, reaching for his service weapon long since locked away. "Max, time for your dinner," he announced promptly at 5 p.m., the dog's meal prepared with more care than his own. Max was 13, old for a retriever, and moved with the same careful deliberation as his master. They were 2 old soldiers waiting out their final deployment together. The May afternoon wrapped Lancaster County in golden warmth, a perfect spring day that seemed determined to coax some joy back into the world. Robert knelt in his garden, methodically thinning the carrot seedlings, His knees protested, but the ritual of gardening, the only habit from his old life that still gave him pleasure, made the pain worthwhile. "That's about right, isn't it?" he asked Max, who lay nearby in a patch of sunlight. The old retriever raised his head briefly, offering a slow tail wag before settling back into his nap. Robert sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The pending sale of his house had lit a fire under his gardening efforts, pointless as they might be. He wouldn't be here to harvest anything he planted, but he couldn't bear the thought of leaving his plot untended. 40 years of working this soil made the habit hard to break. The sound came without warning, a frantic barking at his front gate, sharp and desperate. Max raised his head, ears perked, suddenly alert. Robert frowned. They didn't get many visitors out here, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. "Stay," he told Max, pushing himself to his feet with a grunt. He dusted the soil from his hands as he made his way around the side of the house, the barking growing more insistent. What he saw stopped him cold. A German shepherd stood at his gate, but the sight was more disturbing than surprising. The dog was emaciated, its coat dull and patchy, ribs clearly visible beneath its skin. Despite its condition, it stood tall on its hind legs, front paws on the gate, barking with what little strength it possessed. Go on now!" Robert shouted, instinctively reaching for the walking stick he kept by the porch steps. Max had followed despite the command to stay and now stood beside Robert, hackles raised, a low growl in his throat. The shepherd dropped back to all fours, but didn't retreat. Instead, it paced back and forth before the gate, whining now, looking directly at Robert with an intensity that made him uneasy. There was something in those eyes, something beyond animal desperation. "Probably rabid," Robert muttered, though he knew better. Rabid animals didn't behave with such focus. This dog wanted something. Robert took a cautious step forward, and the shepherd immediately became more animated, barking again before moving a few yards down the road, then looking back expectantly. "What in tarnation?" Robert whispered. He'd grown up on a farm, had been around animals all his life. Wild animals, even strays, avoided human contact unless desperate for food. But this wasn't begging behavior. The dog moved back to the gate, then down the road again, its message unmistakable. "Follow me." Robert hesitated. The sensible thing would be to call animal control and let them handle it. He was an old man with a bad heart and worse knees. Following a strange dog into the countryside wasn't on his list of recommended activities. Yet something about the animal's behavior tugged at him. Those eyes held an intelligence, a desperation that seemed almost human. The shepherd whined again, more urgently. "Lord help me," Robert sighed, making his decision. "Max, you stay." He secured his own dog in the backyard enclosure, ignoring the betrayed look from his old friend. Back in the house, Robert grabbed a bottle of water, his cell phone, and, after a moment's hesitation, the small first aid kit Margaret had always insisted on keeping stocked. His instincts told him he might need it. When he returned to the front gate, the shepherd was still there, pacing anxiously. As Robert opened the gate, the dog backed away, maintaining a careful distance, not fearful, but cautious. "All right then," Robert said quietly. "Show me what's so all-fired important." The dog immediately turned and trotted down the gravel road that led past Robert's property and toward the woods that bordered Miller's Creek. It moved with purpose, but frequently looked back, ensuring Robert was following. The path they took wasn't one Robert used often. It led deeper into the woods than his usual walks, toward an area locals called the Old Hunting Grounds, a stretch of forest that ran up against state game lands. As they moved farther from the road, Robert's breathing grew labored. The shepherd seemed to notice, slowing its pace whenever the distance between them grew too great. "You're a considerate one, I'll give you that," Robert muttered, pausing to catch his breath. The dog waited, watching him with those intelligent eyes. After 15 minutes of walking, they crossed Miller's Creek at a narrow point where fallen logs created a natural bridge. Robert's boots slipped on the damp wood, and he nearly lost his balance. The dog whined anxiously until he regained his footing. "I'm fine," Robert assured the animal, feeling slightly foolish for doing so. "Just not as spry as I once was." Beyond the creek, the woods grew denser, the underbrush more difficult to navigate. Thorny bushes caught at Robert's pants, and low-hanging branches forced him to duck repeatedly. The terrain was challenging even for a younger man, and Robert began to question his decision to follow this strange dog. His heart medication was back at the house, and his chest was beginning to tighten in a familiar, worrying way. The shepherd suddenly darted ahead, disappearing into a thicket of brambles. Robert hesitated, unsure if he could push through without tearing his skin to ribbons. But then he heard it, a faint whimpering sound from beyond the brambles. "Darn it all," he muttered, and carefully began forcing his way through the thorny barrier, ignoring the scratches that soon covered his forearms. When he finally emerged on the other side, what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The German shepherd stood in a small clearing beside a hollow formed by the exposed roots of a fallen oak tree. Inside the hollow, barely visible in the shadows, lay 3 tiny forms, puppies, so young their eyes were barely open. The mother dog, for that's clearly what she was, whined softly and nudged at the smallest puppy. It didn't move. The other 2 made tiny mewling sounds, but their movements were weak, uncoordinated. "Oh, good Lord," Robert whispered, moving forward slowly, careful not to startle the mother. As he knelt beside the hollow, he could see the full extent of the situation. The smallest puppy was already gone, its tiny body still and cold. The other 2 were alive, but barely, their breathing shallow, bodies unnaturally thin even for newborns. Scattered around the hollow were scraps of fabric. Robert recognized the olive-drab color of military-issue material arranged in what appeared to be a nest. The mother had clearly been trying to keep her babies warm. As Robert reached toward the puppies, the shepherd didn't growl or snap as he half expected. Instead, she backed away slightly, watching him with what could only be described as hope. "You came for help," Robert said softly, the realization dawning on him. "You knew you couldn't save them alone." The dog whined in response, her tail giving a single tentative wag. Robert carefully examined the 2 surviving puppies. They were severely dehydrated, their skin tenting when he gently pinched it between his fingers, a trick he remembered from his medic training in Vietnam. Without immediate intervention, they wouldn't last much longer. Nearby, something metallic caught his eye. Half buried in the dirt was a faded blue collar with a tag. Robert brushed away the soil and read the inscription, "Bella," followed by a phone number that was partially worn away. "Bella," he said experimentally. The dog's ears perked up immediately. "So you're not a stray after all." Robert's mind raced. Someone had abandoned this dog and her puppies, or had something happened to the owner? The scraps of military fabric suggested the latter. No one would bring material like that to abandoned dogs in the woods. He carefully removed his light jacket and gently wrapped the 2 surviving puppies inside it, creating a makeshift sling. As he did so, something clinked against his wedding ring. Brushing aside more dirt, Robert uncovered what appeared to be military dog tags, tarnished and half-buried. His heart skipped a beat. These weren't dog tags for a pet. These were human dog tags, the kind he'd worn in Vietnam. "What happened here, girl?" he asked softly, but Bella only whined, her attention fixed on her puppies. Robert pocketed the tags and carefully lifted the bundle containing the 2 puppies. The smallest puppy he regretfully had to leave behind. There was nothing to be done for it now. "Come on, Bella," he said gently. "Let's get your babies somewhere safe." The return journey was slower, more difficult. Robert cradled the puppies against his chest, speaking soothingly when they whimpered. Bella stayed close, occasionally pressing against his leg as if to offer support when he stumbled. By the time they reached his house, Robert's shirt was soaked with sweat, his chest tight with exertion. Max barked excitedly from the backyard as they approached. "Hush now!" Robert called to him. "We've got company!" Inside, Robert quickly created a makeshift nest in a cardboard box, lining it with soft towels and placing it near the kitchen radiator. He transferred the puppies carefully, then filled a shallow bowl with water for Bella, who drank frantically but kept glancing at her puppies. "Let me call someone who can help," Robert told her, reaching for his phone. He dialed the number for Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the local veterinarian who had treated Max for years. As the phone rang, Robert looked at the bundle of fur in the box, at the loyal mother watching over them, and at the dog tags now resting on his kitchen counter. Whatever had brought these animals to his doorstep had set something in motion, something that felt strangely like purpose after years of merely existing. "Dr. Mitchell's office," came the receptionist's voice. "This is Robert Anderson," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I need Dr. Mitchell to come out to my place as soon as possible. I've got 2 dying puppies and their mother who need help." As he spoke, Bella moved to sit beside him, pressing her thin body against his leg as if to say thank you. Robert reached down to stroke her head, a lump forming in his throat. "And tell her to hurry," he added softly. "I think we might be running out of time." Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived in a cloud of dust, her old Jeep skidding slightly on the gravel driveway. Robert watched from the porch as she grabbed her medical bag and hurried toward the house. At 45, she was Lancaster County's most respected veterinarian, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes and hands that moved with practiced efficiency. "Where are they?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Kitchen," Robert replied, leading the way. "The mother's name is Bella. Found her tag, but the number's worn down." Dr. Mitchell's expression turned grave when she saw the German shepherd and her puppies. Bella rose defensively but seemed to sense the doctor's intentions and backed down when Robert murmured reassurance. "My God, Robert." Dr. Mitchell knelt beside the box. "How long have they been like this?" "Just found them about 2 hours ago. Bella came to my gate, led me to them in the woods." The vet raised an eyebrow but focused on examining the puppies first. Her hands moved gently over their tiny bodies while she murmured to herself. The puppies whimpered weakly at her touch. "They're about 3 weeks old," she said finally, "severely dehydrated and malnourished. This one," she pointed to the slightly larger puppy, "has a better chance, but they're both in critical condition." She turned her attention to Bella, who submitted to the examination with anxious eyes fixed on her puppies. "She's been starving herself to feed them," Dr. Mitchell said, running her hands along Bella's protruding ribs. "I'm amazed she had the strength to find help." She paused, noticing the military dog tags on the counter. "What are those?" "Found them buried near the puppies," Robert explained, along with scraps of what looked like military gear, made into a nest of sorts. Dr. Mitchell frowned. "Any identification?" Robert picked up the tags, wiping away more dirt with his thumb. "Franklin T. Miller, Marine Corps, blood type O negative. Catholic." He turned the tag over. "Service numbers here, too." Something stirred in Robert's memory. Miller. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "I need to get fluids into these puppies immediately," Dr. Mitchell said, returning to her medical bag, "and start Bella on small, frequent meals. Her stomach can't handle much after starving for so long." For the next hour, Robert assisted as Dr. Mitchell inserted tiny IV lines into the puppy's fragile veins, administered medications, and showed him how to prepare a special formula to supplement what little milk Bella could still produce. "You'll need to feed them every 2 hours, day and night," she warned, "and keep them warm. Their bodies can't regulate temperature properly yet. Robert nodded, watching as the puppies responded to the fluids, their breathing already less labored. "What about the mother?" he asked. "Small meals, 6 times a day." "I'll leave antibiotics for her too. She's fighting an infection, probably from trying to care for her puppies in those conditions." As Dr. Mitchell packed her supplies, she gave Robert a measured look. "This is a major commitment, Robert. These animals need round-the-clock care for at least 2 weeks. Are you up for that?" The question hung in the air. They both knew about his pending move, his heart condition, his solitary existence. "Got nowhere pressing to be," he replied gruffly. Dr. Mitchell smiled slightly. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on them. Call me if anything changes before then." After she left, Robert sat at his kitchen table watching Bella curl protectively around her puppies in the box. Max observed from a respectful distance, more curious than threatened by the newcomers. The dog tags glinted under the kitchen light. Robert picked them up again, running his thumb over the embossed name, Miller. Why did it sound familiar? Then it hit him. Franklin Miller. The name had been in the local paper about 3 weeks ago. A brief obituary, barely noticeable. A Vietnam veteran, no surviving family, private service. Robert remembered thinking it was a lonely way to leave the world. 3 weeks, just about when these puppies would have been left alone if Miller had been their owner. "Was he your person, Bella?" Robert asked softly. The dog raised her head, her eyes meeting his with an intelligence that struck him again. Robert reached for his phone and dialed his old friend Jack Thompson, who worked at the county VA office. "Jack, it's Robert Anderson. Need to ask you something. Franklin Miller. He was a Marine, passed about 3 weeks back. You know anything about him?" The line crackled with silence before Jack responded. "Frank? Sure, he came in for his benefits every month like clockwork. Lived out by the state forest. Kept to himself mostly. Why you asking?" "Think I found his dog and puppies." "Found out in the woods near my place." Jack sighed heavily. "That sounds right. Frank mentioned a dog once or twice. Said she was the only family he had." "Listen, Robert, Frank was... well, he wasn't doing great toward the end. Heart problems. Doctors told him to check into the VA hospital, but he refused. Said he couldn't leave his dog." Robert's chest tightened with something that wasn't his heart condition. "His place? It's out in the woods, near Miller's Creek?" "Yeah, got a small cabin out there. Off the grid mostly. Vietnam changed him. He couldn't handle being around people much." After ending the call, Robert sat motionless, staring at the dog tags. The picture was becoming clearer. Miller, dying, unable to care for his dog and her new puppies. Had he known the end was coming? Had he tried to create a safe place for them before his heart finally gave out? And why had Bella come to him, specifically? Robert's property wasn't the closest to the woods. There were other houses, other people who might have helped. Robert was pulled from his thoughts by a whimper from the box. One of the puppies was struggling, its tiny body trembling with effort. He quickly prepared a syringe of formula as Dr. Mitchell had shown him and gently fed the puppy, supporting its head with his fingers. "Easy now," he murmured. "That's it." Bella watched him intently, her eyes never leaving his hands as they tended to her baby. As darkness fell, Robert established a makeshift bed on the couch to stay near the dogs. Every 2 hours, his alarm would wake him to feed the puppies, check their temperature, and offer Bella her small meals. By morning, his back ached and his eyes burned with fatigue, but the puppies were still alive, their movements slightly stronger. Max had adjusted to the newcomers with surprising grace, occasionally approaching to sniff the puppies before retreating to his bed. Bella tolerated his presence but remained vigilant. Robert was preparing breakfast, real food for the first time in days, when his phone rang. It was Patricia Collins, his real estate agent. Robert, I've been trying to reach you. The Hendersons want to move up the closing date. They're offering an additional $5,000 if we can finalize in 2 weeks instead of a month. Robert glanced at the kitchen box where Bella lay curled around her puppies. Can't do it, Patricia. Something's come up. What could possibly... Robert, this is a very generous offer. You said yourself you wanted to be out by summer. Things change, he replied simply. Need to stick to the original timeline. At least. Patricia's exasperation was clear even through the phone. Is everything all right? You sound tired. I'm fine. Just busy with something important. After ending the call, Robert made a decision. Taking the dog tags, he drove to the county VA office. The familiar brick building always gave him a slight feeling of unease. Too many memories of waiting for benefits, of being treated like a number instead of a man who'd bled for his country. Jack Thompson looked up from his desk as Robert entered, his round face breaking into a smile. Well, if it isn't the Hermit of Lancaster County, twice in 1 year, must be a record. Robert managed a half-smile. Need your help, Jack. Looking for information on Franklin Miller. Jack's expression sobered. Like I said on the phone, not much to tell. Kept to himself, collected his benefits, came in for medical care when forced. Need to know where exactly his cabin is, and if he had any family after all. Anyone who might want his dog. Jack shuffled through some files on his computer. No family on record. As for the cabin, he scribbled on a notepad. These are the coordinates, roughly. It's on the edge of state land, technically legal, but barely. Why the interest, Robert? Robert hesitated, then placed the dog tags on Jack's desk. Found these near where the dog led me. Need to know who he was. Jack picked up the tags, turning them over in his hands. Frank was a good man. Haunted, like a lot of us, but good. Purple Heart recipient. Served in... Jack squinted at his screen. Da Nang, 1969 to 1970. Robert froze. Da Nang? What unit? 3rd Marine Division, Echo Company. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Robert steadied himself against Jack's desk. You okay, buddy? Jack asked, concern etching his features. I was Da Nang. Same time, different company, but... Robert's voice trailed off as he tried to process the information. Can you pull up his service photo? Jack typed quickly, then turned the monitor. This is from his discharge papers. Robert stared at the young face on the screen. Serious eyes, strong jaw, the straight posture of a Marine. The face triggered a flood of memories. Helicopter rotors, the smell of jungle rot, gunfire in the darkness. I know him, Robert whispered. The ambush at Quang Tri. Our unit was pinned down. I took shrapnel, passed out. Someone dragged me to the extraction point. Never knew who. Woke up on a medevac helicopter. Jack leaned forward. You think it was Frank? Don't know. Maybe. Robert continued staring at the photo, then reached into his wallet and pulled out a creased photograph. His unit in Vietnam, smiling despite the mud and exhaustion. He pointed to figures in the background. That's Echo Company, supporting our mission. Could be him. The revelation settled over Robert like a physical weight. Had Bella somehow known? Was it coincidence that she'd come to him specifically? Need one more favor, Robert said finally. Any records of what happened to him after he died? Jack's expression turned uncomfortable. Standard county burial. No ceremony requested. His body was found by a ranger checking on him after he missed an appointment. Been dead a couple days according to the report. Robert nodded, his jaw tight. Thanks, Jack. What are you going to do about the dog? Animal control could... No, Robert interrupted firmly. I'm handling it. Driving back home, Robert's mind raced with connections, possibilities, obligations. If Miller had indeed saved his life in Vietnam, and now his dog had sought Robert out specifically, it felt like more than coincidence. It felt like a debt, unpaid. As he turned onto his driveway, Robert noticed a familiar Jeep parked near his house. Dr. Mitchell was early for her follow-up. She met him at the door, her expression grim. One of the puppies took a turn for the worse. I've stabilized him for now, but these next 24 hours will be critical. Robert followed her inside, where Bella paced anxiously near the box. One puppy lay noticeably still while the other squirmed weakly. "What happened?" Robert asked, kneeling despite his protesting knees. "Their systems are so compromised from the malnutrition. Their organs are struggling to function properly despite the fluids and nutrition." As Robert gazed at the fragile puppies, a strange resolve settled over him. These weren't just abandoned animals. They were Franklin Miller's family, perhaps the only thing that had mattered to the man who might have saved Robert's life all those years ago. "Tell me what to do," he said simply. Dr. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Robert, this could be a losing battle. You need to prepare yourself." "Tell me what to do," he repeated, firmer this time. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We need to increase the feeding schedule to every hour, keep them warmer, and I want to try a different antibiotic for the weaker one." For the next several hours, Robert and Dr. Mitchell worked side by side, taking turns feeding the puppies through tiny syringes, monitoring their temperature, administering medication. Bella watched every movement, occasionally whining softly when one of the puppies cried out. As evening approached, the smaller puppy's condition stabilized slightly. Dr. Mitchell prepared to leave, providing Robert with additional supplies and detailed instructions. "I'll come back first thing tomorrow," she promised, "but call me any time if things change." Left alone with the dogs, Robert settled into his vigil. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking the hours as he tended to his fragile charges. In the quiet moments between feedings, he found himself talking to Bella. "Your owner, Miller, he might have saved my life once," he told her, keeping his voice low and soothing. "Long time ago in a place very far from here. If it was him, I never got to thank him." Bella's intelligent eyes remained fixed on him, her head tilted slightly as if understanding every word. "If he did save me," Robert continued, "seems like maybe you're giving me a chance to return the favor." The night passed in a blur of hourly alarms, feedings, and medication. By dawn, Robert was exhausted but oddly invigorated. Both puppies had made it through the night, their condition slightly improved. As the morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, Robert made a decision. After feeding the puppies and ensuring Bella had eaten, he called Patricia Collins again. "Need to postpone the house sale," he said without preamble. "Indefinitely." "Robert!" Patricia's shock was evident. "What are you talking about? The paperwork is already in process. The Hendersons are counting on—" "Things have changed," Robert interrupted. "Something important has come up. I'm staying." "Is this about your son? Has something happened?" Robert looked at Bella, who had raised her head at his tone. "No, it's about a debt I need to repay." After ending the call, ignoring Patricia's continued protests, Robert felt a strange lightness. For the first time in years, he had made a decision based not on convenience or surrender, but on purpose. His next call was harder. Michael answered on the fourth ring, his voice cautious as always. "Dad, everything okay?" "Fine," Robert replied, suddenly uncertain how to explain. "Just checking in." The silence stretched uncomfortably before Michael spoke again. "That's good. We're all fine here. Emily's got a dance recital next week." "That's nice." Robert paused, then decided to take the plunge. "Listen, Michael, I've decided not to sell the house after all." "What? Why?" "I thought you were all set on that retirement community near the VA. Plans change. Found something that needs my attention here." Michael's sigh was audible. "Dad, is this about Mom? Because holding on to the house won't bring her—" "It's not about your mother," Robert interrupted more sharply than intended. He softened his tone. "It's about making things right, paying back a debt." "What debt? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Robert almost laughed. "No, the opposite, maybe." He glanced at the puppies, at Bella watching him intently. "How's Emily doing?" "Really?" The sudden change of subject seemed to throw Michael off balance. "She's okay. Been a little down since her dog died last month. Cancer. She'd had him since she was 5. Something clicked in Robert's mind. "Bring her to visit, when you can." "Dad, Virginia's not exactly around the corner, and with work—" "I know. Just think about it. There's something here she might like to see." After the call ended, Robert sat back, feeling as though something had shifted, not just in his immediate circumstances, but in the structure of his life that had been frozen in place for years. The sound of a car on his gravel driveway pulled him from his thoughts. Looking out the window, he was surprised to see Dr. Mitchell returning so soon. "Thought I'd check in before my regular appointments," she explained as he met her at the door. Her eyes widened as she saw the dark circles under Robert's eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," he replied, leading her to the kitchen. Dr. Mitchell examined the puppies, her expression softening into relief. "They're doing better than I expected. You must have been very diligent with the feedings." "Every hour, like you said." She straightened up, giving him an appraising look. "You know, when I first got your call yesterday, I was sure I'd be taking these dogs to the shelter after stabilizing them. But you seem committed." Robert nodded slowly. "Found out some things about their owner, Franklin Miller. Think he might have saved my life in Vietnam." Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a coincidence." "Maybe not coincidence," Robert said quietly, watching as Bella gently nosed her puppies. "Maybe something else entirely." The following days fell into a rhythm that gradually began to feel like purpose rather than obligation. Robert's life, which had drifted in the formless haze of grief for years, suddenly had structure again: rigid feeding schedules, medication times, brief moments of rest between responsibilities. He moved through his house with a new energy, his aching joints somehow less bothersome when there was important work to be done. Bella grew stronger with each passing day. Her ribs were still visible, but her coat had begun to regain some luster, and her eyes, intelligent and watchful, followed Robert everywhere. The puppies, too, showed improvement. The larger one, which Robert had started calling Sergeant in his mind, was noticeably more active, his tiny legs kicking with surprising strength during feedings. The smaller one, Scout, remained fragile, but fighting, his recovery slower but steady. Dr. Mitchell visited every other day, her initial professional detachment giving way to genuine investment in their progress. "You've got quite the touch with them," she remarked on her 4th visit, watching as Robert expertly fed Scout with a syringe, his large, calloused hands impossibly gentle with the tiny creature. "Most people wouldn't have the patience for this level of care." Robert shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "Not doing anything special." "Oh, I think you are." Her eyes drifted to the makeshift chart Robert had created on his refrigerator, meticulously tracking feeding times, weight measurements, and medication doses. "This is the kind of care we can't provide at the clinic. It's making all the difference." As the puppy's health improved, Robert found himself thinking more about Franklin Miller. The connection nagged at him, the possibility that Miller had saved his life in Vietnam, and now, through Bella, Robert had the chance to repay that debt. It felt too significant to be coincidence. On the 7th day after finding Bella, Robert decided it was time to investigate further. With the puppies stable enough to be left in Max's watchful company for a few hours, and Bella showing signs of restlessness, he decided to search for Miller's cabin. "Want to go for a ride, girl?" he asked Bella, who immediately perked up at his tone. "Maybe visit your old home?" The German Shepherd's reaction was unmistakable, a series of excited whines and a wagging tail. Robert had hoped she might lead him back to Miller's cabin, and her enthusiasm confirmed his instinct. After ensuring the puppies were warm and secure, Robert let Bella into his old pickup truck. She settled into the passenger seat as if she'd ridden there all her life, her nose pressed to the window as they rumbled down the gravel driveway. Using the coordinates Jack Thompson had provided, Robert drove toward the state forest boundary. Bella grew increasingly alert as they approached, whining softly when Robert turned onto a nearly invisible dirt track that wound into the trees. The road quickly became impassable for the truck. Robert parked in a small clearing and looked at Bella. "You know the way from here?" As if understanding perfectly, Bella jumped from the truck and trotted a few yards ahead, looking back expectantly. Robert followed, noting how the dog moved with increasing confidence through the woods. They hiked for nearly a mile, the trail barely discernible even to experienced eyes, before Bella suddenly quickened her pace. The cabin appeared through the trees without warning, a small, weathered structure built against the natural protection of a rocky outcropping. It was more substantial than Robert had expected, with a metal roof, a small covered porch, and what appeared to be solar panels attached to one side. The surrounding area had been carefully maintained, with split firewood stacked neatly against one wall and a small garden plot now overgrown to one side. Bella ran the last few yards to the cabin, her entire body quivering with excitement. She circled the structure, sniffing eagerly, then bounded onto the porch and scratched at the door, looking back at Robert with obvious expectation. "This was your home," Robert said softly, approaching the cabin. The place had a solid, permanent feel. Not the makeshift shelter of someone just passing through, but the carefully constructed sanctuary of a man who intended to stay. It spoke of skill and patience, qualities Robert recognized and respected. The door was secured with a simple padlock. Robert hesitated briefly, aware he was about to trespass, then reminded himself that Miller had no family, no one to claim his belongings. If anything, Bella had more right to be here than anyone else. A quick search revealed a spare key hidden in a rusted coffee can under the porch steps, exactly where Robert himself would have put one. The similarity wasn't lost on him. Men of their generation, their experience, thought alike in many ways. The lock opened with a stubborn click. As Robert pushed the door open, Bella darted inside, moving with the familiarity of home. The cabin's interior was dim but remarkably clean and organized. A wood stove dominated one wall, with a neatly stacked pile of kindling beside it. A narrow bed, military neat, occupied one corner. Shelves lined another wall, filled with books, canned goods, and medical supplies. Robert moved slowly through the space, taking in the details of Miller's life. A small table held a kerosene lamp and several notebooks. The kitchenette area was simple but functional, with cast-iron cookware hanging from hooks. Everything had a place, everything served a purpose. It was the dwelling of a man who had pared life down to its essentials. Bella had settled in a worn basket near the wood stove, watching Robert with calm eyes. This was clearly her bed, her place in the orderly world Miller had created. "He took good care of you," Robert told her, noting the well-stocked cabinet of dog food and medications. On a small desk near the window sat several framed photographs. Robert picked one up, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. A Marine unit in Vietnam, posed similarly to the photo he carried in his wallet. Different men, different company, but the same war, the same mud, the same haunted eyes trying to look unafraid for the camera. The second photo showed a much younger Miller kneeling beside a military working dog, a German Shepherd like Bella, but darker in coloring. The connection clicked into place for Robert. Miller's affinity for the breed likely came from his wartime experience with these loyal animals. The third frame didn't hold a photo, but a citation, the commendation for Miller's Purple Heart. Robert read it carefully, his heart racing as the details confirmed what he had begun to suspect. The date, location, and description matched the ambush where Robert had been wounded. The citation described how Miller, despite being injured himself, had risked enemy fire to drag 2 wounded Marines to safety. One of those Marines had been Robert Anderson. The revelation left Robert breathless. He sank into Miller's chair, the worn wood creaking beneath his weight. All these years he'd wondered who had saved him that day. The debt had lingered, unacknowledged, but never forgotten. And now, through a series of events that defied simple explanation, Miller's dog had brought that debt full circle. "He saved my life," Robert told Bella, his voice rough with emotion. "And never said a word about it all these years?" Bella thumped her tail against the basket, her eyes never leaving Robert's face. Further exploration of the cabin revealed more connections between the two men. A worn copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, Robert's own favorite. A collection of hand-carved wooden figures crafted with the same techniques Robert's father had taught him. A framed map of Lancaster County with Robert's property clearly marked. Had Miller known all along who his neighbor was? In the desk drawer, Robert found a journal, its pages filled with Miller's neat, precise handwriting. He hesitated, respecting the privacy of a fellow veteran, but his need to understand overcame his reluctance. The entries were sporadic, some dated months apart. Miller wrote about his daily life in the woods, his struggle with heart problems, his refusal to seek treatment that would separate him from Bella. The last entry, dated just 3 weeks earlier, sent a chill through Robert. "Chest pains worse today. Know what's coming. Bella's puppies due any day now. Have prepared a place for them in the hollow oak, closest to Anderson's property. If anything happens to me, she knows to go there. Smart dog. Too smart sometimes. She'll find help if she needs to." Miller had known he was dying, had prepared for it, had somehow trained Bella to seek help specifically from Robert's direction. "He trusted me with you," Robert said softly, looking at Bella, without even asking. The responsibility settled over Robert with surprising lightness. This wasn't a burden, but a gift, purpose, connection, meaning after years of emptiness. As the afternoon light began to fade, Robert knew they needed to return home to the puppies. Before leaving, he gathered a few essential items from the cabin: Bella's favorite toys, Miller's journals, the photographs. He would return later for a more thorough inventory, but for now, these connections to Miller's life seemed most important. Locking the cabin carefully behind them, Robert and Bella made their way back through the woods. The German shepherd led confidently, occasionally circling back to ensure Robert was following, just as she had that first day at his gate. When they reached the truck, Robert paused, looking back toward the hidden cabin. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words meant for a man who couldn't hear them. "For everything." The drive home was peaceful, Bella dozing in the passenger seat as if a weight had been lifted from her. Robert felt it too, the strange relief of understanding, of pieces falling into place after years of disorder. As they pulled into his driveway, Robert noticed an unfamiliar car parked near his house. Patricia Collins, the real estate agent, had apparently decided their phone conversation wasn't sufficient. Robert sighed, preparing himself for a difficult conversation. Patricia met him at the porch, her professional smile thinly masking her frustration. "Robert, I've been trying to reach you all day. The Hendersons are very concerned about your sudden change of heart." Robert nodded toward the truck, where Bella waited patiently. "Had some important business to attend to?" Patricia's eyes widened as she noticed the German shepherd. "Is that? Robert, please tell me you haven't canceled the sale of your house over a stray dog." "Not just the dog," Robert replied, moving past her to unlock his door. "Something more important than that." Inside, Max greeted them with anxious whines, clearly relieved at their return. Robert immediately checked the puppies, who were sleeping peacefully in their box. Patricia followed him inside, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as she took in the scene, the carefully arranged puppy supplies, the feeding chart, the medications. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked, watching as Bella went straight to the box, gently nosing each puppy as if counting them. Robert considered how to explain. How could he articulate the connection he'd discovered, the debt he owed, the purpose he'd found? Patricia, with her smartphone and her suburban sensibilities, would never understand the bond between two old soldiers who'd never even spoken. "Taking care of something that matters," he said simply. "And I can't do that if I sell the house." Patricia's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Robert, I understand you've become attached to these animals, but surely there are other solutions, a shelter perhaps, or—" "No shelters," Robert interrupted firmly. "These dogs stay with me." "But your retirement plan, the apartment near the VA, you've been working toward that for years." Robert thought of Miller's cabin, of the simple, purposeful life the man had built in the woods, of how he'd chosen Bella's company over medical treatment that might have extended his life. "Plans change," he said. "Found something worth staying for." Patricia looked as though she wanted to argue further, but something in Robert's expression stopped her. She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly in defeat. "The Hendersons won't be happy, and you'll lose your deposit on the retirement community." "I'll survive," Robert replied, already turning his attention to preparing Bella's dinner. After Patricia left, with a promise to figure something out regarding the house sale, Robert settled into his evening routine with the dogs. The puppies were due for another feeding, and Bella watched attentively as he prepared their formula. As he fed them, Robert found himself talking to Bella, sharing stories about Vietnam, about the ambush, about waking up in a field hospital with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The German shepherd listened with that same intelligent focus, as if understanding every word. "Your owner never said a word to me afterward," Robert told her. "Never came to see me in the hospital, never asked for recognition, just did what needed doing and moved on." He smiled slightly. "Guess you learned from the best." That night, as Robert prepared for bed, his phone rang unexpectedly. Checking the caller ID, he was surprised to see Michael's name. "Dad? Just checking in? You sounded different when we talked the other day." Robert settled into his armchair, watching as Bella nursed her puppies on the blanket he'd arranged near the heating vent. "Different how?" Michael hesitated. "I don't know. More like before Mom got sick, I guess." The observation struck Robert with its accuracy. He did feel more like his old self, the man he'd been before grief and isolation had hollowed him out. "Found something that needed doing," he said finally. "Something important." "The debt you mentioned?" "Yeah." Robert paused, unsure how much to share. "Michael, do you remember me ever talking about the ambush in Quang Tri?" The line went quiet for a moment. "The one where you got hit?" "Sure, a few times when I was a kid. You said someone pulled you out, but you never knew who." "Found out recently. Man named Franklin Miller. Lived not far from me all these years." "That's quite a coincidence," Michael said, echoing Dr. Mitchell's words. "Maybe not coincidence," Robert replied. "Anyway, he passed away 3 weeks ago. Left behind a dog, German shepherd named Bella. She had puppies just before he died." "And, let me guess, you've adopted them?" Michael's tone held a mix of surprise and amusement. "Something like that. Bella found me, actually. Led me to her puppies in the woods. They were in bad shape, still are, but improving." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "That's why you're not selling the house?" "Can't very well take care of them in that tiny apartment they had picked out for me." Another pause, Longer this time. "Emily's still pretty torn up about losing her dog," Michael said finally. "We've been talking about getting another one, but—" Robert felt a surge of hope at the opening. "Well, there's a puppy here that might need a good home, once he's strong enough." "Really?" The interest in Michael's voice was unmistakable. "What kind of puppy?" "German Shepherd, good breeding, smart as a whip if he takes after his mother." "Dad, that's—" Michael stopped, and Robert could practically hear him reconsidering whatever he'd been about to say. "That's really generous. Emily would be thrilled. Could bring her out to see him, when you have time." Robert tried to keep his tone casual despite the sudden tightness in his chest. "Plenty of room here. Always has been. Maybe we could do that." "Summer break starts next week." Michael's voice had softened. "Been too long since we visited properly." After they hung up, Robert sat for a long time, watching Bella with her puppies. The German Shepherd raised her head, meeting his gaze with those knowing eyes. "Well," Robert told her, "seems like things are changing around here." Bella thumped her tail in what Robert chose to interpret as agreement. That night, Robert dreamed of Vietnam for the first time in years. But unlike the nightmares that had plagued him, this dream was different. He saw Miller, young, strong, determined, dragging him through the mud and vegetation, away from the gunfire. In the dream, Miller looked directly at him, and his eyes were the same intelligent, soulful eyes as Bella's. Robert woke feeling strangely peaceful. Outside his window, dawn was just beginning to break over the Lancaster County hills. In the kitchen, he could hear Bella moving around, checking on her puppies. For the first time in years, Robert Anderson didn't just wake up, he rose to meet the day. The weather forecasters had been tracking the storm system for days, but like many summer disturbances in Lancaster County, its severity had been underestimated. Robert first noticed the changing pressure when his knees began to ache more insistently than usual, an old soldier's barometer that rarely failed him. By mid-morning, dark clouds had gathered on the western horizon, their underbellies tinged with an ominous green. "Going to be a bad one," Robert muttered to Max as he secured the yard furniture and checked the gutters one last time. The old retriever whined softly, already seeking the shelter of the covered porch. Animals always knew. Inside, Robert made his preparations methodically. Flashlights with fresh batteries, candles and matches placed strategically throughout the house. The battery-powered radio tuned to the weather station. A cooler filled with ice for medications that needed refrigeration. Years of military training had taught him to prepare for contingencies, and Lancaster County storms could knock out power for days. The puppies, now almost 4 weeks old, had graduated from their cardboard box to a larger enclosure in the living room, complete with a heating pad for warmth. Their eyes were fully open now, bright and curious, their movements more coordinated. Scout, the smaller puppy, still lagged behind his brother in weight, but his fighting spirit remained strong. Bella watched Robert's storm preparations with obvious anxiety, pacing between the windows and her puppies. When thunder rumbled in the distance, she pressed herself against Robert's leg, trembling slightly. "Not a fan of storms, are you, girl?" Robert knelt, wincing at the protest from his knees, and stroked her head. "Don't worry. We're all safe in here." Dr. Mitchell arrived just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, her Jeep splashing through puddles already forming in the driveway. She hurried to the porch with her medical bag, shaking water from her jacket. "Thought I'd better check on our patients before this hits full force," she explained, following Robert inside. "They're saying it could be worse than expected. Flash flood warnings for the creek areas." Robert frowned. Miller's Creek ran just beyond his property line, close enough to be a concern if it overflowed its banks. "Creek's been low all summer. Should have plenty of capacity." Dr. Mitchell didn't look convinced as she examined the puppies. "They're doing remarkably well, considering where they started. she said, her skilled hands gently assessing each puppy. Scout's still behind on the growth curve, but his vital signs are strong. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving rain against the windows in sheets. Thunder boomed closer now, and Bella pressed herself into the corner of the room as far from the windows as possible. "Poor girl," Dr. Mitchell said, noticing Bella's distress. "Some dogs never get used to storms. The pressure changes, the static electricity in the air. They feel it all more intensely than we do." Robert nodded, remembering how Bella had led him through the woods that first day, despite her fear and exhaustion. "She's braver than she looks." Dr. Mitchell packed her supplies, glancing worriedly at the increasingly violent weather. "I should get back to the clinic before this gets worse. We've got animals boarding who will be scared." She handed Robert several vials of medication. "Continue with these for another week. After that, they should be strong enough to transition to solid food." As she prepared to leave, Dr. Mitchell paused at the door. "Robert, if the creek starts rising, don't wait too long to evacuate. These little ones can't afford to get chilled and wet." "We'll be fine," Robert assured her, though a flicker of concern had taken root. "Been through worse than a summer storm." "After, Doctor." Mitchell left. Robert moved to the living room window, watching as her Jeep navigated the increasingly flooded driveway. The rain was coming down in blinding sheets now, the wind bending the old oak trees nearly horizontal. In all his years in Lancaster County, he'd rarely seen a storm intensify so quickly. The power flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Robert turned on the local news, where meteorologists were tracking the storm with growing concern. Flash flood warnings had been upgraded to emergencies in several nearby communities. The weather radar showed the worst of the system directly over Lancaster County, with another band of severe storms following close behind. Residents in low-lying areas should be prepared to evacuate, the meteorologist was saying. Miller's Creek and Susquehanna tributaries are expected to rise rapidly due to the unusual rainfall amounts. Robert's stomach tightened at the mention of Miller's Creek. His property sat on a gentle rise, the house itself likely safe from flooding, but the rear portion of his land, where it sloped down toward the creek, could quickly become a problem. A tremendous crack of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the windows. The power died instantly, plunging the house into premature darkness, broken only by the storm's eerie light. "Right on cue," Robert muttered, switching on the battery-powered lamp he'd prepared. Bella whined from her corner, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. The puppies, disturbed by the noise, began squeaking in distress. Robert moved to their enclosure, speaking soothingly as he checked that their heating pad was still warm. Without electricity, it would gradually cool, and maintaining their body temperature was crucial. For the next hour, the storm raged with unrelenting fury. Robert moved methodically through his emergency procedures, checking windows for leaks, monitoring the battery-powered weather radio, and keeping the animals calm. The puppies, exhausted by their fear, eventually fell asleep huddled together with Bella curled protectively around them. It was Max who first alerted Robert to the changing situation. The old retriever suddenly stood at the back door, barking with unusual intensity. Robert joined him, shining his flashlight through the glass door toward the backyard. What he saw made his blood run cold. Water was rising visibly at the bottom of his property, already submerging the lower garden. Miller's Creek had jumped its banks and was now flowing unchecked across the land, moving inexorably toward the house. "Damn it," Robert muttered, calculating distances and elevations in his head. The house sat about 4 feet above the current water level, normally a comfortable margin, but the rain showed no sign of slackening, and the ground was already saturated. The weather radio crackled with an updated emergency alert. Unprecedented rainfall amounts causing catastrophic flash flooding. All residents near Miller's Creek should evacuate immediately. Emergency shelters are open at Lancaster High School and the community center. Robert weighed his options. Evacuating meant loading 3 dogs, including 2 fragile puppies, into his truck and navigating flooded roads in near-zero visibility. Staying meant risking the floodwaters reaching the house, potentially trapping them all. His military training screamed at him to evacuate early, to retreat to safer ground. But his protective instinct toward the puppies, still so vulnerable, made him hesitate. Moving them in these conditions carried its own risks. Robert made a compromised decision. He would prepare for evacuation, but wait to see if the water continued to rise toward the house. The rain had to slacken eventually. Working quickly, Robert gathered essential supplies: dog food, medications, blankets, his own heart medication, and Miller's journals and photographs. He placed everything in waterproof containers near the front door, ready for a rapid departure. For the puppies, he modified a small cooler, lining it with blankets and adding a hot water bottle wrapped in towels, an improvised portable incubator that would keep them warm during transport. Bella watched these preparations anxiously, dividing her attention between her puppies and the increasingly threatening noises outside. Even Max seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying unusually close to Robert instead of hiding from the thunder as he typically would. Another hour passed, the storm maintaining its relentless assault. Robert checked the backyard again, his flashlight beam reflecting off water that had crept another foot up the slope. At this rate, it would reach the house within hours. The decision was made for him when a section of the back fence collapsed under the pressure of debris carried by the floodwater. The sudden rush of current accelerated the water's advance dramatically. "Time to go," Robert announced to the animals, his voice calm despite the urgency he felt. Years of combat had taught him that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He moved with practiced efficiency, securing Max in the truck first, then returning for Bella and the makeshift puppy carrier. As he carefully transferred the sleeping puppies into the cooler, Bella watched with nervous attention, whining when he closed the lid with small air holes he'd punched earlier. "They'll be safe," he assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. The front yard remained relatively dry, protected by the slight elevation of the house, but Robert could see water beginning to pool near the driveway. If they waited much longer, even this escape route might be compromised. With Bella secured in the passenger seat and the puppy carrier safely between them, Robert started the truck. The engine roared to life, a reassuring sound amid the storm's chaos. He switched on the headlights, illuminating curtains of rain so dense they seemed almost solid. Robert eased the truck down his driveway, moving cautiously as water splashed beneath the tires. The main road was partially flooded but still passable, the water not yet deep enough to threaten the engine. They had gone less than a quarter mile when disaster struck. A massive oak tree, its roots undermined by the saturated soil, crashed across the road directly in front of them. Robert slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a stop just feet from the fallen giant. "Damn it all to hell," Robert muttered, assessing the situation. The tree completely blocked the road, its massive trunk impossible to move without heavy equipment. Turning around, he discovered that the water behind them had risen alarmingly in just the few minutes since they'd left the house. They were trapped, the road ahead blocked, the way back increasingly dangerous. Robert's mind raced through options, his training kicking in automatically. Stay with the vehicle, the most visible target for rescuers. Attempt to navigate around the tree on foot, carrying the puppies. Neither option seemed promising in the continued downpour. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, and Robert noticed a small access road about 50 yards back. A service path he knew led up to higher ground, eventually connecting with the main highway. It would be rough going in the truck, but it offered their best chance of escape. Carefully backing up, Robert turned onto the narrow dirt track. now transformed into a muddy stream. The truck's tires spun, seeking purchase in the slick surface. Robert engaged the four-wheel drive, and the vehicle lurched forward, climbing slowly toward higher ground. They had almost reached the crest of the hill when the truck's engine sputtered and died. Water had found its way into the electrical system, a common death sentence for vehicles in flood conditions. "No, no, no," Robert muttered, trying the ignition repeatedly. The engine coughed weakly but refused to catch. They were stranded halfway up the hillside with no transportation and the storm showing no signs of abating. Robert assessed their situation grimly. The truck provided shelter from the rain, but if the floodwaters continued to rise, even this position might become untenable. His cell phone showed no service. The storm had likely disabled the nearest towers. Bella whined softly, pressing closer to the puppy carrier. Robert checked inside. The puppies remained asleep, warm and dry in their makeshift nest. For now, they were safe, but the situation could deteriorate rapidly. As if confirming his fears, a new sound rose above the storm's roar, a deep, rumbling crack that seemed to come from the direction of Miller's Creek. Robert knew that sound from his time in Vietnam during monsoon season. It was the sound of an earthen dam or creek bank giving way under pressure. "This isn't good," he told Bella, who looked up at him with trusting eyes. The responsibility he felt in that moment was overwhelming. These animals depended on him entirely. They had no other advocate, no other protector. The rumbling grew louder, and through the rain-streaked windows, Robert could see a new surge of water rushing down the valley. Miller's Creek had likely broken through a natural dam upstream, releasing a wall of water that was now sweeping everything in its path. The truck, parked on the hillside, was above the direct path of the flood, but the rising water would eventually reach them if the rain continued. They needed to move to even higher ground. Robert made another difficult decision. They would have to abandon the truck and continue on foot, carrying the puppies up to the ridgeline where cell service might be restored. "We're moving, girl," he told Bella, who stood alert, ready to follow. Robert gathered the puppy carrier, secured his jacket around it for additional protection, and opened the truck door. The force of the wind and rain nearly knocked him off balance, his old knees protesting sharply as he stepped into ankle-deep mud. Bella jumped down beside him, immediately soaked but staying close. Max, hesitant to leave the truck's shelter, finally followed after Robert's firm command. Together, the strange procession began climbing the steep path toward the ridge. An old man with a bad heart, an elderly retriever, a still recovering German shepherd, and two tiny puppies in a makeshift carrier. The going was treacherous. The path, rarely used in good conditions, had become a muddy slide in the downpour. Robert slipped repeatedly, once falling hard to one knee, barely managing to keep the puppy carrier level. Pain shot through his leg, but he pushed it aside, focusing only on the next step, the next yard of progress. Bella, showing remarkable awareness, positioned herself directly beside Robert, offering her body as support when he stumbled. Max struggled behind them, his old joints clearly paining him, but the retriever's loyalty kept him moving forward despite his distress. Halfway up the ridge, Robert's chest began to tighten. The familiar pressure that signaled his heart condition was flaring under the exertion. He paused, breathing deeply, trying to calm the racing of his pulse. His medication was in the waterproof pack on his back, but stopping to take it now in the driving rain seemed impossible. Just a little farther, he told himself, forcing his body forward despite the warning signals it was sending. The ridge was maybe 200 yards ahead, not far in normal conditions, but an eternity in this storm with his failing strength. Another 100 yards, and Robert's vision began to blur at the edges. The pain in his chest had intensified, radiating down his left arm in the classic warning sign of cardiac distress. He stumbled, nearly falling, and felt Bella press more firmly against his leg, steadying him. "Good girl," he gasped, the words almost lost in the storm's fury. The puppies had awakened, their frightened squeaks audible even through the container and the storm's roar. Robert checked them quickly. They were still dry and warm, but clearly distressed by the movement and noise. With monumental effort, Robert forced himself to continue climbing. Each step became a deliberate act of will, his body screaming for rest while his mind demanded forward progress. The ridge seemed no closer despite their efforts, the rain obscuring distance and direction. And then, without warning, Robert's heart seized in his chest. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, driving him to his knees in the mud. The puppy carrier slipped from his grasp, but Bella was there instantly, catching the handle in her mouth before it could roll down the hillside. "Good girl," Robert managed through gritted teeth, fighting to remain conscious as black spots danced before his eyes. He fumbled for his backpack, for the medication that might stave off the worst of the attack, but his fingers refused to cooperate. Max barked frantically, circling Robert in distress. Bella, still holding the puppy carrier, whined urgently, her eyes fixed on Robert's face. "Take them," Robert gasped, gesturing weakly toward the ridge. But Bella refused to leave, setting down the carrier only to nudge insistently at Robert's face, trying to rouse him. The last thing Robert saw before consciousness slipped away was Bella's face close to his, her intelligent eyes filled with what looked remarkably like human concern. Then darkness claimed him, the storm's fury fading into silence. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. The steady beep of monitoring equipment, the antiseptic smell of hospital, the dull ache in his chest that medication couldn't quite mask. Robert opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light. A hospital room gradually came into focus, standard issue with beige walls and the ubiquitous television mounted in the corner. An IV line snaked from his arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging beside the bed. "Welcome back," said a familiar voice. Robert turned his head, wincing at the stiffness in his neck, to find Dr. Sarah Mitchell sitting in the visitor's chair beside his bed. She looked tired but relieved, her usual professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. "The dogs," Robert croaked, his throat dry from intubation he didn't remember. Dr. Mitchell smiled slightly. "Typical. Nearly die in a flood. And your first question is about the dogs." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "They're safe, all of them. Bella wouldn't leave your side until the paramedics arrived. Then somehow she led them back to where Max was guarding the puppies." Relief flooded through Robert, more potent than any medication coursing through his veins. "How did help find you?" Dr. Mitchell finished for him. "That's the remarkable part. When you didn't answer your phone, I got worried and called emergency services. They were already overwhelmed with flood rescues, but then a couple of hunters who were checking their cabin reported seeing a German shepherd running along the ridge, barking frantically. When they followed her, she led them straight to you." Robert closed his eyes briefly, unsurprised. Bella had already proven her intelligence and determination once before. "You had a significant cardiac event," Dr. Mitchell continued, her tone becoming more clinical. "Combination of exertion, stress, and your existing condition. They had to airlift you out. The roads were completely flooded. You've been here for 2 days. 2 days." Robert tried to process this information through the fog of medication and exhaustion. "The dogs?" he asked again. "They're at my clinic," Dr. Mitchell assured him. "The puppies are thriving, believe it or not. Bella refused food until I brought her to see you yesterday. Just a quick visit that I had to smuggle her in for." Against hospital regulations, but she shrugged. Some rules need breaking. Robert nodded gratefully, but another question pressed urgently. My house? Dr. Mitchell's expression sobered. There was some water damage to the lower level. Nothing structural from what I could see, but you'll need professional cleanup once the water recedes completely. The worst of the storm has passed, but Miller's Creek is still well above flood stage. Robert absorbed this information, mentally cataloging repairs and costs. The house he'd nearly abandoned now seemed suddenly precious, not just shelter, but home to his unlikely new family. A nurse entered, checking Robert's vitals and adjusting his medication. You have another visitor, she informed him after completing her tasks. Says he's your son. Visiting hours end in 30 minutes. After she left, Robert looked questioningly at Dr. Mitchell, who smiled. I took the liberty of calling the emergency contact in your wallet. Michael arrived last night. He's been splitting his time between here and helping me with the dogs. Before Robert could process this information, the door opened again and Michael Anderson stepped into the room. At 43, he strongly resembled the younger Robert. Same solid build, same serious eyes, though without the weight of war behind them. He carried a cardboard coffee cup, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. Dad, he said simply, relief evident in his voice. You're awake. Dr. Mitchell stood, gathering her coat. I'll leave you two to talk. Robert, I'll check on you tomorrow. The cardiologist will be by later today to discuss your treatment plan. After she left, an awkward silence filled the room. Robert and Michael hadn't been in the same physical space for nearly 3 years, not since Margaret's funeral. Their phone calls, though more frequent recently, hardly prepared them for this moment. You look like hell, Robert finally said, his attempt at humor undermined by the weakness in his voice. Michael's mouth twitched in a half-smile. You're one to talk. He moved to the chair Dr. Mitchell had vacated. They said it was a heart attack. Pretty serious one. Robert nodded slightly. Been heading that way for a while. Medication only holds things off so long. Another silence stretched between them. Michael stared into his coffee cup as if it might contain the right words. Dr. Mitchell told me about the dogs, he finally said. About Miller. About all of it. Robert watched his son's face, trying to read his reaction. Didn't plan any of it. Just happened. That's what she said. Michael looked up, meeting his father's eyes directly. She also said the German Shepherd probably saved your life. Led the rescue team right to you. Bella, Robert supplied. Her name's Bella. Michael nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. I met her yesterday. Smart dog. How protective. Wouldn't let me near the puppies until Dr. Mitchell introduced us properly. The image of Bella sizing up his son brought a weak chuckle from Robert. Good judge of character. She must be, Michael agreed, if she trusted you with her puppies. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Dad, the doctor says you're going to need significant recovery time, and your house needs repairs before it's habitable again. Here it comes, Robert thought. The conversation about assisted living, about giving up his independence. He braced himself for the familiar argument. But Michael surprised him. Emily and I put together a plan, if you're willing to hear it. Robert nodded cautiously, unsure where this was heading. We can help you repair the house. I've got 3 weeks of vacation time saved up, and Emily's on summer break. We'd been planning a trip to Florida, but... He shrugged. This seems more important. Robert stared at his son, momentarily speechless. This was not the conversation he'd expected. You'd do that? For my father? Yes. Michael's voice carried a certainty that brooked no argument. And there's more. Emily is... He smiled slightly. Well, she's fallen in love with the puppies, especially the smaller one. Scout, you called him? Named him in my head, Robert admitted. Never said it aloud. Well, Emily's been calling him that too. Apparently, great minds think alike. Michael's smile faded into seriousness again. Dad, I know we haven't been close, not since Mom got sick. There's blame on both sides and we should talk about that. But not now. Right now, you need to focus on getting better, and we need to make plans. Robert felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart condition, a loosening of a knot that had been there so long he'd stopped noticing its presence. What kind of plans? He asked cautiously. Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. The kind where family helps family, the kind where we figure things out together. He hesitated, then added, the kind that would make Mom proud. Outside the hospital window, the storm clouds had finally broken, allowing weak sunshine to filter through. The worst had passed, both literally and perhaps figuratively as well. The hospital room had taken on the sterile familiarity that comes with extended stays. Robert knew every crack in the ceiling, every squeak in the visitor's chair, every variation in the routine of nurses changing shifts. 4 days had passed since he'd regained consciousness, each one marked by incremental improvements that his doctors cautiously celebrated while insisting on continued observation. Your heart sustained significant damage, Dr. Abrams, the cardiologist, had explained during his morning rounds. The good news is you're tough as old leather. The concerning news is you pushed yourself well beyond what your heart could handle during that storm. Robert had nodded, accepting both the compliment and the admonishment. He'd survived worse in Vietnam, but he was no longer a young soldier. Time had collected its inevitable tax on his body. The hospital had reluctantly allowed one brief, supervised visit from Bella, arranged by Dr. Mitchell, who had somehow convinced the floor nurse that it qualified as therapy. The German shepherd had approached Robert's bed cautiously, sniffing the medical equipment with obvious suspicion, before gently resting her head on the mattress beside his hand. The connection in that moment, the silent understanding between them, had brought unexpected tears to Robert's eyes. Michael had been a constant presence, arriving each morning with fresh coffee and updates on the house repairs. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a mess of mud and debris in the lower level, but the structure itself had remained sound. Michael and a crew of local veterans, friends of Frank Miller as it turned out, had been working tirelessly to clean up. They just showed up, Michael had explained, wonder in his voice. Said they heard Frank Miller's dog had saved my dad, and that was good enough for them. Must have been 15 guys, Dad. Some of them looked like they could barely walk themselves, but they all pitched in. The sense of community, of belonging, had been so long absent from Robert's life that he'd almost forgotten its power. Miller's quiet influence had extended beyond his death, creating connections that continued to surprise Robert. On this 5th morning of his hospital stay, Robert sat up in bed, watching through the window as a gentle summer rain washed the world clean after the destructive storm. His chest still ached, and his breathing sometimes caught painfully, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. The soft knock at his door was familiar now, Michael's distinctive pattern. "Come in," Robert called, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. But when the door opened, it wasn't just Michael who entered. Behind him came a young girl with sandy blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes, the same serious gray as Michael's, widening as she took in the medical equipment surrounding her grandfather. "Emily," Robert said softly, genuine pleasure warming his voice. He hadn't seen his granddaughter in nearly 3 years. At 10, she was on the cusp of adolescence, no longer the little girl who had played in Margaret's garden, but not yet a teenager with walls built against the world. "Hi, Grandpa," she replied, hanging back slightly behind her father. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the IV stand, the heart monitor, the oxygen tubing, all the frightening paraphernalia of serious illness. "It's okay," Robert assured her, recognizing her apprehension. "Looks worse than it is. Doctors just like their gadgets." Emily stepped forward, hesitantly, clutching a homemade card in her hands. "I made this for you," she said, placing it carefully on his bedside table. The front featured a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a man surrounded by dogs. "That's you," she explained, pointing to the central figure. "And that's Max and Bella and the puppies. Dad showed me pictures." "It's perfect," Robert told her, genuinely touched by the simple gift. "Thank you." Michael pulled up the visitor's chair for Emily, then leaned against the wall. "Emily's been helping Dr. Mitchell with the puppies," he explained. "They've graduated to solid food now." Emily's reserve melted instantly at the mention of the puppies. "Scout is so smart, Grandpa. Dr. Mitchell says he's small but mighty. And Sergeant, that's what Dad says you call the other one, he's huge already. Dr. Mitchell says they're doing really well despite everything." Robert smiled at her enthusiasm. "Sounds like you've gotten to know them pretty well." Emily nodded eagerly. "I go every day after Dad finishes working on your house, Doctor. Mitchell lets me help with their feeding and socialization. That means playing with them so they get used to people," she added, clearly proud of the technical term. "She's a natural with them," Michael added, a note of pride in his voice. "Dr. Mitchell said she's never seen someone Emily's age with such good instincts around animals." The conversation flowed more easily after that, with Emily chattering about the puppies' personalities and progress. Her initial nervousness around her grandfather had dissolved in the face of their shared interest. Robert found himself responding to her energy, answering her questions about Bella, and how he'd found the puppies with a patience and openness that seemed to surprise Michael. After about 20 minutes, Michael checked his watch. "Em, we should let Grandpa rest. We can come back this evening if the doctors say it's okay." Emily's face fell slightly, but she nodded obediently. As she stood to leave, she hesitated, then blurted out, "Dad says Scout might come live with us when he's big enough. Is that true?" Robert glanced at Michael, who gave a slight nod. "If you'd like that," Robert replied carefully. "And if Scout would be happy with you, then yes." Emily's face lit up with a smile that reminded Robert painfully of Margaret. "I'd take really good care of him, Grandpa, I promise." "I know you would," Robert said, his voice roughening with unexpected emotion. After they left, Robert sat in silence, processing the visit. The easy connection with Emily had been unexpected, a bridge across years of distance that he hadn't thought possible to rebuild. And Michael's willingness to adopt one of the puppies suggested a commitment to maintaining that connection moving forward. The afternoon passed slowly. Robert dozed intermittently, his sleep disturbed by routine vital checks and medication doses. Each time he woke, his thoughts returned to the puppies, to Bella, to his home being restored by strangers who had known Miller. The sense of responsibility he felt toward them all had transformed from burden to purpose. Dr. Mitchell arrived in the early evening, still wearing her clinic scrubs and looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you might want an update on your furry family," she said, settling into the visitor's chair with a grateful sigh. "How are they?" Robert asked, more eagerly than he intended. "Thriving," she replied with a smile. "Bella's completely recovered. Her coat is starting to shine again, and she's gained nearly 10 pounds. The puppies are growing like weeds, especially Sergeant. But Scout—" Her smile faltered slightly. Robert tensed. "What about Scout?" Dr. Mitchell sighed. "He was doing so well, Robert. But yesterday evening he started showing signs of respiratory distress. I've got him on antibiotics, but—" "Pneumonia?" Robert guessed. familiar with the complication from his research on caring for at-risk puppies. She nodded grimly. Likely aspiration pneumonia from his early malnutrition. His immune system is still compromised despite our best efforts. Robert's chest tightened with an ache that had nothing to do with his heart condition. How serious? I'm doing everything I can, Dr. Mitchell replied, which wasn't really an answer. The next 24 hours will be critical. He's a fighter, though, like his mother. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in concern for the tiny life hanging in the balance. Finally, Dr. Mitchell spoke again, her voice softer. Emily's been a godsend. She sits with him, talks to him. There's research suggesting that kind of interaction actually boosts immune response in young animals. She's a good kid, Robert said. Got her grandmother's heart. Dr. Mitchell smiled slightly. She's got more than a little of you in her, too, from what I can see, that stubborn determination. She refused to leave Scout's side until her father made her go home and rest. The thought of his granddaughter maintaining a vigil over the struggling puppy created a complex tangle of emotions in Robert's chest. Pride, gratitude, and a deep sadness that he couldn't be there himself. I should be there, he said, frustration edging his voice. Not stuck in this damn bed. Dr. Mitchell's expression turned stern. You should be exactly where you are, Robert Anderson. The best thing you can do for those puppies right now is get well enough to come home. The word home caught Robert by surprise. Not get discharged or leave the hospital, but come home, as if Dr. Mitchell understood that the house he'd nearly abandoned had reclaimed its place as the center of his world. Any chance of that happening soon? He asked. That's up to your doctors, she replied diplomatically. But from what I've heard, you're making good progress. Just don't push it. After Dr. Mitchell left, promising to call with any updates on Scout, Robert found himself unable to settle. The thought of the struggling puppy fighting for breath in a strange clinic haunted him. He'd come to see both puppies as his responsibility, a trust from Miller, from Bella, from fate itself. The night passed in fitful snatches of sleep interrupted by worry. Each time a nurse entered to check his vitals, Robert asked for the time, mentally calculating how many hours had passed since Dr. Mitchell's update on Scout. Morning brought Michael, arriving earlier than usual with dark circles under his eyes and a grim set to his mouth. Robert knew immediately that something was wrong. "Scout?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Michael nodded, sinking into the visitor's chair. Dr. Mitchell called around midnight. He was struggling. Emily overheard me on the phone and insisted on going to the clinic. Robert's heart sank. Did he? He's still fighting, Michael said quickly. But Dr. Mitchell says it's not looking good. His oxygen levels keep dropping despite the supplemental oxygen. Robert closed his eyes briefly, fighting back an unexpected surge of grief. He'd known from the beginning that Scout's chances were precarious, but the puppy's fighting spirit had made him believe in the possibility of a full recovery. Emily's still there, Michael continued. Sarah, Dr. Mitchell, set up a cot in her office so Emily could sleep near the treatment area. I couldn't, his voice caught. I couldn't make her leave him. Robert nodded, understanding completely. She's bonded with him. It's more than that, Michael said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. She keeps saying he needs her, that he'll give up if she's not there. And the thing is, Dad, Dr. Mitchell agrees. Says Emily's presence seems to calm him, helps his breathing stabilize. The image of his granddaughter keeping vigil over the tiny puppy brought a lump to Robert's throat. She's got Margaret's heart, he repeated softly. Michael smiled sadly. Mom would have done the same thing. Remember when she found that injured robin? Stayed up 3 nights straight, feeding it with an eyedropper. The shared memory hung between them, a rare moment of connection through their mutual loss. Margaret had been the bridge between them, and when she'd gone, that connection had frayed almost to breaking. "I should be there," Robert said, echoing his words to Dr. Mitchell. "With Emily. With Scout." Michael studied his father's face. "You really care about these dogs, don't you? It's not just about Miller or the debt you think you owe him." Robert considered this, then nodded slowly. "Started that way, maybe. But now," he struggled to find the right words, "they need me. Haven't had that feeling in a long time." Something shifted in Michael's expression, a softening, a recognition. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "Since the divorce with Emily, being needed changes things." Another connection formed between them, the understanding of what it meant to be essential to someone else's well-being. Robert had forgotten that Michael had his own experience with loss, with rebuilding a life around new priorities. The moment was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Dr. Abrams entered, clipboard in hand, ready for morning rounds. Michael stood, preparing to leave. "I'll head back to the clinic," he told Robert. "Call you as soon as there's any news." Left alone with his cardiologist, Robert submitted to the usual battery of tests and questions, his mind only half present. When Dr. Abrams finally finished his examination, he studied Robert with clinical detachment. "Your numbers are improving," he said. "Blood pressure stabilizing, heart rhythm more regular. How's the pain level?" "Manageable," Robert replied shortly, not interested in discussing his own condition when Scout's life hung in the balance. Dr. Abrams seemed to sense his patient's distraction. "Something on your mind, Mr. Anderson?" Robert hesitated, then decided on honesty. "One of the puppies, the ones I told you about, he's sick. Pneumonia, fighting for his life at the vet clinic." The doctor's professional demeanor softened slightly. "I heard about those puppies. The nurses have been talking about your story. Quite remarkable." "Need to be there," Robert said firmly. "Not here." Dr. Abrams raised an eyebrow. "You suffered a major cardiac event less than a week ago, Mr. Anderson. Your heart needs time to heal." "My heart needs to be where it's needed," Robert countered, surprising himself with the emotion in his voice. The doctor studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I can't discharge you yet. The risk of complications is still too high, but—" Robert waited, hope rising cautiously. "I could authorize a brief, supervised visit to the veterinary clinic, a few hours with proper monitoring and medication, if, and only if, your morning labs come back stable." Relief flooded through Robert so intensely that the heart monitor beside his bed registered the change, beeping slightly faster. "Thank you, doctor." "Don't thank me yet," Dr. Abrams cautioned. "If your labs indicate any instability, the deal is off, and you'll return immediately if you experience any symptoms, shortness of breath, chest pain, dizziness. Understood?" Robert nodded, already mentally preparing for the visit. "Understood." The next few hours passed with excruciating slowness as Robert waited for his lab results. He used the time to shower and shave, activities that left him embarrassingly winded but determined to appear stronger than he felt. The simple dignity of wearing his own clothes, brought by Michael days earlier, instead of the hospital gown, made him feel more human. Just before noon, Dr. Abrams returned with guarded approval and a list of strict conditions. Transportation would be provided by hospital transport, not Michael's car. A nurse would accompany him. The visit would last no more than 3 hours. Any sign of distress would result in immediate return to the hospital. "I'm not entirely comfortable with this," Dr. Abrams admitted. "But sometimes the psychological benefits outweigh the physical risks. Just don't make me regret my decision, Mr. Anderson." By early afternoon, Robert found himself in a wheelchair, a concession he'd grudgingly accepted, being loaded into a hospital transport van. The nurse assigned to accompany him, a no-nonsense woman named Gloria, checked his portable heart monitor and oxygen levels before they departed. "Doctor, Mitchell's clinic is about 15 minutes away," she informed him. "I'll be monitoring your vitals throughout the trip. Any abnormalities and we turn right back around." Robert nodded, too focused on his destination to argue. The drive through Lancaster County revealed the storm's lingering effects. Downed trees, debris piled along roadways, watermarks on buildings showing how high the floodwaters had reached. Miller's Creek, visible as they crossed the bridge, still ran high and fast, though no longer at the dangerous levels of the previous week. Dr. Mitchell's veterinary clinic occupied a converted farmhouse on the outskirts of town, its large yard enclosed by white fencing that currently housed several dogs romping in the afternoon sun. Robert's eyes scanned the yard automatically, looking for Bella, but she wasn't among them. The van pulled into a designated space near the entrance. Gloria helped Robert from the wheelchair to a walker, another concession to his weakened state, and they made their way slowly into the clinic. The reception area was busy with pet owners and their animals, but the young woman at the desk recognized Robert immediately. "Mr. Anderson, Dr. Mitchell said you might be coming. Let me take you right back." She led them through a door marked "Staff Only" and down a hallway lined with examination rooms. At the end of the corridor, she knocked softly on a door labeled "Intensive Care." Dr. Mitchell opened it, her face registering surprise despite having been warned of his possible visit. "Robert, I didn't expect you so soon." Her eyes took in the walker, the portable heart monitor, the hovering nurse. "Are you sure you're up for this?" "I'm sure," Robert replied firmly. "How is he?" Dr. Mitchell's expression sobered. "Fighting." "Come see for yourself." She led them into a room equipped with small incubators, monitoring equipment, and medical supplies. In the corner, Emily sat on a folding cot, her attention fixed on the smallest incubator where a tiny form lay barely visible beneath oxygen tubing and monitoring wires. She looked up as they entered, her tired face brightening. "Grandpa, you came." "Of course I did," Robert replied, making his way slowly to her side. "Couldn't let you handle this alone." As he reached the incubator, Robert's breath caught in his throat. Scout, impossibly small against the white bedding, struggled visibly for each breath. His little chest heaved with the effort, and a terrible wheezing sound accompanied each inhalation. "The infection's in both lungs now," Dr. Mitchell explained quietly. "We're giving him the strongest antibiotics he can tolerate, supplemental oxygen and fluids. But ultimately, it's up to him to fight this." Robert studied the tiny puppy, this scrappy survivor who had already overcome so many obstacles. "He's a fighter," he said, with more confidence than he felt, "like his mother." "Speaking of whom," Dr. Mitchell said, "let me bring Bella in. She's been separated from him since he became ill. Standard protocol to prevent stress on the patient. But I think she should see you." While Dr. Mitchell went to retrieve Bella, Robert sank gratefully onto a chair beside Emily's cot. His granddaughter leaned against him tentatively, then with more confidence when he put his arm around her shoulders. "I've been reading to him," she confided, showing Robert a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web. "Dr. Mitchell says he might be able to hear me and it could help him stay calm." Robert squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's good thinking. Your grandmother used to read to your dad when he was sick." "Said it was better medicine than anything the doctors prescribed." Emily smiled at the connection to the grandmother she barely remembered. "Dad told me about Bella leading you to the puppies, and about Mr. Miller saving your life in the war. It's like a circle, isn't it?" "A circle," Robert repeated, struck by the simple wisdom of her observation. "Yes, I suppose it is." The door opened, and Bella burst into the room, making a beeline for Robert. The German shepherd pressed against his legs, whining softly, her entire body quivering with excitement. Robert bent to stroke her head, his eyes stinging with unexpected tears. "Hello, girl," he said roughly. "Missed you too." Bella then turned her attention to the incubator, approaching it cautiously. Dr. Mitchell made no move to stop her as she sniffed around the edges, her nose quivering as she processed the sense of medication and illness surrounding her puppy. After a thorough investigation, Bella settled on the floor beside the incubator, her body positioned protectively between it and the door. Her eyes moved between Robert, Emily, and her puppy as if assessing the situation and determining her role in it. "She understands he's in trouble," Dr. Mitchell observed quietly. "German shepherds have an extraordinary capacity for comprehension. She knows you're here to help." The next hour passed in a strange, suspended state of waiting. Robert sat with Emily, listening as she read softly to Scout from her book. Bella remained at her post by the incubator, occasionally rising to check on her puppy before settling back down. Gloria, the nurse, monitored Robert's vital signs discreetly, seeming moved by the tableau before her. Dr. Mitchell came and went, checking Scout's vitals, adjusting his oxygen, administering medications through the tiny IV in his leg. Each time she offered a professional assessment. Oxygen levels holding, temperature slightly elevated, lung sounds still congested, but her eyes told a different story. The puppy was struggling, and despite all her skill and technology, his fate remained uncertain. As the 3-hour mark approached, Gloria reluctantly informed Robert that they would need to return to the hospital soon. He nodded, disappointed but not surprised. The brief visit had drained what little energy he had, and he could feel his heart laboring despite the medications. "Can I have a moment?" he asked, gesturing toward the incubator. Gloria nodded. "Just a minute or two." Emily helped Robert to his feet, and together they approached Scout's incubator one last time. The puppy lay still, his breathing slightly less labored than before, but still concerning. Robert placed his hand gently on the clear plastic, as close as he could get to touching the tiny fighter inside. "You listen to me, Scout," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've got people counting on you. Emily here needs you. Your mother needs you." He paused, swallowing hard. "I need you. So you keep fighting. You hear me? That's an order, soldier." Emily's hand joined his on the incubator. "Please, get better, Scout," she whispered. "I'm staying right here until you do." As if in response, the puppy's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, glazed with fever, but undeniably conscious. His tiny chest heaved with another labored breath, but his paws moved slightly, as if reaching toward their voices. Dr. Mitchell, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward to check the monitors. Her expression registered surprise, then cautious optimism. "His oxygen levels just improved slightly," she reported. "It might be temporary, but—" "It's not temporary," Robert stated with certainty. "He heard us." "He's fighting." As Gloria helped Robert back to the walker, he turned to Dr. Mitchell. "Call me with any change, no matter how small." "I will," she promised. "And Robert, having you here today, it mattered to all of them." Her eyes moved from Scout to Emily to Bella, who had risen to follow Robert toward the door. Robert nodded, unable to express the complex emotions swirling in his chest. As they left the room, he glanced back one last time at the tableau they were leaving behind. Emily returning to her vigil beside the incubator, Bella resuming her protective position, Scout's tiny form beneath the oxygen hood. A family of sorts, bound together by circumstance and choice. The return journey to the hospital passed in silence, Robert too exhausted and preoccupied for conversation. His body ached with fatigue, but his mind remained at the clinic with the struggling puppy who had come to represent so much more than just an animal in need. That night, alone in his hospital room, Robert found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades, praying. Not the formal prayers of his childhood church, but simple, direct appeals for mercy and strength on behalf of a tiny creature fighting for life. "He deserves a chance," Robert whispered into the darkness. "They all do." Sleep eventually claimed him, bringing dreams of Vietnam, of Miller pulling him to safety through the jungle, of Bella leading him through the woods, of Scout running strong and healthy across a sunlit field. In the dream, Margaret was there too, smiling as she watched Emily playing with the puppy. A circle, as Emily had said. A completion of something long left unfinished. Robert woke to the soft buzzing of his cell phone on the bedside table. The room was still dark, the night shift nurses moving quietly in the hallway outside. The clock read 3:17 a.m. With a sense of dread, Robert answered the phone. "Hello? Robert? Doctor." Mitchell's voice was tired but clear. "I thought you should know right away. Scout's fever broke about an hour ago. His oxygen levels are improving steadily. He just took his first voluntary feeding since yesterday morning." Relief washed through Robert so powerfully that for a moment he couldn't speak. "He's going to make it?" he finally managed. "I never make absolute promises in medicine," Dr. Mitchell replied, professional caution tempering her evident relief. "But yes, I believe he's turned the corner. Emily's reading finally put him to sleep. Both of them, actually. She's curled up on the cot with Charlotte's Web still in her hand." Robert smiled in the darkness, picturing the scene. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." "Get some rest, Robert," she replied gently. "Your family is going to need you strong." After they hung up, Robert lay awake for a long time, watching the first hint of dawn lighten the sky outside his window. "Your family, Doctor?" Mitchell had said, not specifying whether she meant his human family or the dog's. Perhaps, Robert reflected, the distinction no longer mattered. They were all his family now, Michael and Emily, Bella and her puppies, even Dr. Mitchell in her way. And somewhere, Robert liked to think, Miller was watching over them all, satisfied that his beloved Bella had found her way to exactly where she needed to be. 2 weeks after his heart attack, Robert Anderson sat on the edge of his hospital bed, fully dressed in his own clothes for the first time since the flood. His discharge papers lay beside him, signed and processed. A small duffel bag containing the few personal items Michael had brought him during his stay sat packed and ready. After 17 days of constant monitoring, medication adjustments, and cardiac rehabilitation, he was finally going home. Home. The word carried new weight now. Not just a house he'd nearly abandoned, but a place where he was needed, expected, awaited. Dr. Abrams had completed his final examination that morning, reviewing Robert's discharge instructions with the stern precision of a man who expected to be obeyed. "Moderate activity only," he'd emphasized, tapping the printed sheet with his pen. "Short walks, gradually increasing in distance. No lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds. No driving for at least 2 weeks. And absolutely no strenuous work around that house of yours." Robert had nodded, willing to agree to almost anything that would get him out of the hospital. The doctor's expression had softened slightly as he'd added, "Your recovery has been remarkable, Mr. Anderson, especially considering your age and the severity of the event. I'm not a superstitious man, but I'd say you had someone watching over you out there in that storm." Now, waiting for Michael to arrive with the car, Robert fingered the dog tags in his pocket, Miller's tags, which had become something of a talisman during his hospital stay. Perhaps the doctor was right. Perhaps someone had been watching over him. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Michael stood in the doorway, car keys in hand, looking more relaxed than Robert had seen him in years. "Ready to break out of this joint?" his son asked with a small smile. Robert nodded, picking up his duffel bag, only to have Michael gently take it from him. 10 pounds, remember? Michael reminded him. Pretty sure Dad's anatomy of surgery doesn't qualify. Robert had forgotten about the heavy medical reference book he'd asked Michael to bring from home, a remnant from his brief medic training that had proven useful in understanding his own condition. He relinquished the bag without argument, accepting that this new dynamic, being cared for rather than always being the caregiver, would take some adjustment. The wheelchair ride to the hospital entrance was hospital policy, not negotiable despite Robert's protests that he could walk perfectly well. The orderly pushing him chatted amicably about the weather, which had settled into the perfect Lancaster County summer pattern: warm days, cool nights, with just enough rain to keep the farmland lush without threatening further flooding. Michael had parked his SUV directly in front of the main doors. As the orderly helped Robert from the wheelchair to the passenger seat, a small voice called out from the back seat, "Grandpa, we made signs!" Robert turned to see Emily grinning from the back seat, holding up a colorful poster board that read, "Welcome Home, Grandpa," decorated with drawings of dogs that were recognizable as Max, Bella, and the puppies. "That's mighty fine artwork," Robert said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Once they were underway, Emily leaned forward between the front seats, barely contained excitement radiating from her. "Wait till you see Scout, Grandpa. He's so much bigger, and his eyes are super bright now, and Dr. Mitchell says he's the most remarkable recovery she's ever seen in a puppy his age." Robert smiled at her enthusiasm. Daily phone updates from both Michael and Dr. Mitchell had kept him informed of Scout's progress, but Emily's perspective, full of wonder and devoid of medical terminology, painted a more vivid picture. "And Bella missed you so much," Emily continued. "Dr. Mitchell brought her to the house yesterday to help us get everything ready, and she kept going to your chair and looking at the door." The image of Bella waiting for him brought an unexpected lump to Robert's throat. "How's Max getting along with everyone?" he asked, remembering his old retriever's initial wariness of the newcomers. "They're best friends now," Emily assured him. "Max lets the puppies sleep next to him, and he shares his toys with them, even the squeaky duck he never let anyone touch before." Michael caught Robert's eye with a knowing smile. "The house has become quite the menagerie," he commented. "4 dogs, 3 humans, and enough pet supplies to stock a small store." "3 humans?" Robert questioned, raising an eyebrow. Michael kept his eyes on the road, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "Sarah, Dr. Mitchell suggested someone should stay with you for at least the first few weeks after discharge. Emily and I have been using the guest room." The information hung in the air, neither question nor statement, but clearly waiting for Robert's response. In the past, he might have bristled at the implication that he needed supervision, might have insisted on his independence regardless of the consequences. But now, he found himself nodding. "Makes sense," he said simply. "Appreciate the company." Michael's shoulders relaxed visibly, as if he'd been bracing for an argument that didn't come. As they drove through Lancaster County, Robert noticed subtle changes in the landscape. Fresh repairs to fences damaged by flooding, new gravel on washed-out driveways, piles of debris still waiting for removal. The storm had left its mark, but the community was healing, rebuilding, moving forward. When they turned onto Robert's long gravel driveway, he was struck by how different everything looked. The overgrown shrubs that had bordered the drive had been neatly trimmed. The sagging gate had been repaired and painted. Even the mailbox, which had listed to one side for years, stood straight and proud with a fresh coat of red paint. "You've been busy," Robert observed, taking in the transformation. Michael shrugged. "Had some help. Turns out there's a whole network of veterans around here who knew Frank Miller. Once they heard about what happened, they just showed up with tools and supplies, said it was the least they could do for Miller's dog's new family." The house itself came into view, and Robert felt a wave of emotion wash over him. The flood damage had been completely repaired. New siding where the old had been water-stained, fresh paint on the porch, the garden beds restored and flourishing with summer flowers Margaret had planted years ago. "Emily picked out the flowers," Michael said quietly, noticing where Robert's gaze had landed. "Said Grandma would want her garden to look nice for your homecoming." Before Robert could respond, movement on the porch caught his attention. Bella stood at the top of the steps, tail wagging furiously, with Max beside her and two small shapes that could only be the puppies tumbling around their feet. "They knew we were coming," Emily said excitedly. "Bella's been watching the driveway all morning." Michael parked near the porch steps and came around to help Robert from the car. Though he was steadier on his feet now, Robert accepted his son's supporting arm without protest, understanding that the assistance was as much for Michael's peace of mind as for his own safety. As they approached the porch, Bella could contain herself no longer. She bounded down the steps, circling Robert with joyful whines, pressing against his legs with such enthusiasm that he had to steady himself against Michael to avoid being knocked over. "Easy, girl," Robert laughed, bending carefully to stroke her head. "I'm happy to see you too." Max approached more sedately, befitting his advanced age, but his tail wagged with genuine pleasure as Robert greeted him. "Been holding down the fort, old boy?" Robert asked, scratching the retriever's favorite spot behind his ears. The puppies remained on the porch, watching the proceedings with evident curiosity. They had grown remarkably in the weeks since Robert had last seen them, no longer the fragile, helpless creatures he'd found in the hollow log, but robust, active puppies with bright eyes and sturdy bodies. "Which one is Scout?" Robert asked, though he thought he already knew. The smaller of the two, with Bella's intelligent eyes and an alert, observant posture, watched him with particular intensity. "That's him," Emily confirmed, pointing to the very puppy Robert had identified. "The little survivor." With Michael's support, Robert climbed the porch steps and lowered himself carefully onto the wooden bench his father had built decades ago. Scout approached cautiously, sniffing Robert's outstretched hand before allowing a gentle scratch under his chin. "Hello, soldier," Robert said softly. "Heard you've been fighting the good fight." Scout's response was to place his front paws on Robert's knee, stretching up to examine his face more closely. The gesture of trust from the puppy who had hovered so near death brought another unexpected lump to Robert's throat. The other puppy, Sergeant, as Robert had named him in his mind, required no such careful introduction. He bounded over with typical puppy enthusiasm, attempting to climb into Robert's lap until Michael gently redirected him. "He's got no sense of personal space," Michael explained with a laugh. Complete opposite of his brother. Robert observed the contrasting personalities with amusement. "Just like human siblings," he noted. "Never quite turn out the same, no matter how you raise them." Michael's eyes met his, a moment of understanding passing between them. They had never discussed the differences in their personalities, Robert's stoic reserve versus Michael's more open emotionality, but those differences had contributed to their estrangement after Margaret's death. Now, watching the puppies, they found a neutral way to acknowledge what had long gone unspoken. "Come on inside, Grandpa," Emily urged, holding the door open. "We've got everything ready for you." The interior of the house had undergone as much transformation as the exterior. The living room, once a museum to the past with Margaret's decorations left untouched for years, had been thoughtfully rearranged. Robert's favorite chair remained in its place by the window, but now a side table held neatly organized medications, a pitcher of water, and a stack of books. A reclining feature had been added to the chair, new, but blending seamlessly with the familiar furniture. "Dr. Mitchell said elevation would help with circulation," Michael explained, noticing Robert's gaze on the modified chair. The carpenter who made it was one of Miller's friends. Throughout the house, Robert noticed similar touches, practical adaptations to accommodate his recovery without fundamentally changing the home he'd known for decades. A handrail had been added to the short staircase leading to the kitchen. The shower had been outfitted with a seat and non-slip flooring. His bedroom had been moved to the first floor in what had once been Margaret's sewing room. "You've thought of everything," Robert said, genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of the preparations. "Can't take much credit," Michael admitted. "Dr. Mitchell orchestrated most of it. She seems to know a lot about cardiac recovery." The mention of Dr. Mitchell reminded Robert of her absence. "Speaking of the good doctor, I thought she might be here." "She had emergency surgery this morning," Emily explained. "A dog with bloat. But she said she'd stop by this evening to check on you." The day passed in a gentle rhythm of settling in, resting, and reconnecting. Emily proudly showed Robert how she had been training the puppies with basic commands, Scout already responding reliably to sit and stay, Sergeant more interested in play than obedience but learning nonetheless. Michael prepared lunch with the easy competence of someone who had been managing the household for weeks, explaining the meal plan Dr. Mitchell and the hospital nutritionist had developed for Robert's cardiac recovery. By mid-afternoon, fatigue had caught up with Robert despite his determination to remain engaged with his family. Michael noticed his flagging energy and suggested a rest before dinner, helping him to the newly arranged bedroom where Robert gratefully stretched out on the familiar mattress from his upstairs room, now positioned to allow him to see out the window to the garden. He woke to the sound of a vehicle in the driveway. The angle of the sun suggested he had slept for several hours, the summer evening still bright but softening toward dusk. Voices drifted in from the front porch. Michael's, Emily's, and a third voice he recognized as Dr. Mitchell's. Robert made his way carefully to the front of the house, noting with appreciation how the furniture had been arranged to allow clear pathways that could accommodate his still unsteady gait. Outside on the porch, he found Dr. Mitchell seated on the bench, Emily cross-legged on the floor with the puppies, and Michael leaning against the railing. "There he is," Dr. Mitchell said, rising to greet him. "How does it feel to be home?" "Better than I expected," Robert admitted, lowering himself into the chair Michael quickly pulled forward. "Thanks to all of you." Dr. Mitchell performed a brief examination, checking his pulse, listening to his breathing, and asking pointed questions about his energy levels and any symptoms he might be experiencing. Satisfied with his condition, she joined them for dinner. A simple but delicious meal of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a peach cobbler that Emily proudly announced she had made herself. As they ate at the kitchen table, dogs settled expectantly nearby, hoping for scraps. Robert was struck by how natural it all felt. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from Emily's school projects to Michael's work. He had been handling his architectural firm's business remotely, Robert learned, to Dr. Mitchell's stories of unusual veterinary cases. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and a warmth that had been absent from the house for too long. After dinner, as the summer evening cooled, they moved back to the porch. Robert noticed a wooden chest near the door that hadn't been there before, new but crafted in the same style as the bench his father had built. "What's this?" he asked, running his hand over the smooth wood. Michael and Dr. Mitchell exchanged a glance before Michael answered. "It's from Miller's cabin. We thought you should have it." Robert looked at them questioningly. "There's something you need to see," Dr. Mitchell said, her expression serious. "We found it when we went back to check on Miller's place after the flood." The creek rose high enough to reach the cabin, but most of his things were safely stored in waterproof containers. She opened the chest, revealing several notebooks, photographs, and documents neatly organized inside. On top lay a sealed envelope with "For the Marine who finds Bella," written in a careful hand. "We didn't open it," Michael said. "It seemed personal." Robert took the envelope with slightly trembling hands, recognizing in the precise handwriting the same discipline and attention to detail evident in Miller's cabin. The envelope was thick, containing what felt like several pages, and possibly something solid. "Should I?" Robert glanced at the others, suddenly unsure about revealing what might be private in front of them. "We can give you some privacy," Dr. Mitchell offered, starting to rise. "No," Robert decided. "Whatever this is, it concerns all of us now." He carefully opened the envelope, mindful of his still healing surgical incision as he reached inside. The first item he withdrew was a folded letter on simple, lined paper. The second was a small key attached to a plastic tag with a series of numbers. The third, which made Robert catch his breath, was a photograph, faded and worn around the edges, of a much younger Robert being loaded onto a medevac helicopter in Vietnam. A young Marine supported him, face partially obscured but recognizable as Franklin Miller. "It is him," Robert said softly, passing the photograph to Michael. "The man who saved me in Vietnam." Michael studied the image, then handed it to Dr. Mitchell, who looked at it with professional detachment before returning it to Robert. "Read the letter," she suggested gently. Robert unfolded the pages, the careful handwriting immediately recognizable from Miller's journals. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "To the Marine who finds Bella and her puppies. If you're reading this, then two things have happened. I'm gone, and Bella found her way to you. I trained her to seek help from the Anderson place if anything happened to me. Figured a fellow Marine would understand the bond between a man and his dog. Yes, I know who you are. Robert Anderson. Known since you moved to Lancaster County in '82. Kept my distance. Figured we both came out here for similar reasons. Some wounds don't heal well in company. I never told you about Quang Tri because it wasn't important that you knew. What was important was that you lived. You had a family waiting. I had no one. Bella changed that for me. Found her as a stray pup 4 years ago, half wild but smart as any dog I've ever known. She's been my family since then. Now she needs someone else. There's practical matters to address. The key is for a safety deposit box at First Lancaster Bank, number 247. Inside, you'll find my will, which leaves the cabin and the 5 acres around it to whoever cares for Bella. Also my savings. Not much, but enough to cover her care for years to come. The VA Benefits Administrator, Jack Thompson, has all the paperwork ready. I know about your heart condition, small towns talk, and Jack mentioned you had the same ticker problems I've been fighting. Difference is, you sought treatment. I couldn't bear the thought of being separated from Bella in some hospital. Take care of her, if you're willing. If not, my will specifies a sanctuary in Virginia that will take her. But I think you'll understand her. She's loyal, smart, and too stubborn for her own good. Sounds like some Marines I've known. One last thing. I've watched you these past years, same as I've watched all the vets around here. Seen you pulling away from life after your wife passed. Don't make my mistake, Anderson. Isolation isn't strength, it's just another form of surrender. Semper Fi, Franklin T. Miller Sergeant, USMC. Robert's voice had grown increasingly unsteady as he read, and by the end, he fell silent, staring at the neat signature at the bottom of the page. The porch was quiet except for the evening sounds of insects and the occasional soft whine from one of the dogs. "He knew," Robert finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years, he knew who I was, where I was. And at the end, he trusted you with what mattered most to him," Dr. Mitchell observed quietly, watching as Bella moved to rest her head on Robert's knee, sensing his distress. Emily, who had listened to the letter with solemn attention, looked up from where she sat with the puppies. "He was watching over you, Grandpa, like a guardian angel, but real." The simple wisdom of her observation brought a smile to Robert's face despite the tightness in his chest. I suppose he was, in his way. Michael studied the key thoughtfully. "We should visit the bank tomorrow, see what's in that safety deposit box." Robert nodded, his hand absently stroking Bella's head. "Miller said Jack Thompson knows about all this." We should talk to him too. As the conversation turned to practical matters, the bank visit, contacting Jack, the legal aspects of Miller's will, Robert found his attention drifting to the broader implications of the letter. Miller had observed him withdrawing from life after Margaret's death, had recognized in Robert's isolation a pattern he himself had followed. And in his final act, Miller had broken that pattern, reaching out across the chasm of years and shared trauma to create a connection. "He saved me twice," Robert said suddenly, interrupting Michael's discussion of power of attorney documents. The others looked at him questioningly. "Once in Vietnam," Robert explained, "and again by sending Bella to me. He knew what I needed before I did." Dr. Mitchell smiled softly. "Some people have that gift, seeing what others need most, even when they don't recognize it themselves." The evening deepened around them, the first stars appearing in the summer sky. Emily had fallen asleep on the porch swing, Scout curled protectively beside her. Sergeant and Max had retreated indoors to their preferred sleeping spots. Only Bella remained alert, dividing her attention between Robert and the darkness beyond the porch, ever watchful. As Michael helped Emily inside to bed, Dr. Mitchell lingered, her professional demeanor softening into something more personal. "I should get going," she said, gathering her bag. "Early surgeries tomorrow." Robert nodded, suddenly reluctant to see her leave. Over the weeks of his hospitalization and the puppy's recovery, Dr. Mitchell, Sarah, had become more than just a veterinarian. She was part of whatever this new family arrangement was becoming. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything." She smiled, understanding all that those simple words encompassed. "I'll stop by tomorrow evening to check on you. Call if you need anything before then." After she left, Robert remained on the porch with Bella, watching the stars brighten in the clear summer sky. Miller's letter rested in his lap, its revelations still sinking in. The man had known him, watched over him from a distance, and finally reached out in the only way he could. Michael returned from settling Emily, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He handed one to Robert before taking Dr. Mitchell's vacated seat. "Quite a day," he commented, his tone deliberately casual. Robert nodded, taking a sip of the tea, perfectly sweetened the way Margaret had always made it. "Quite a few weeks." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that had once been impossible between them, filled as it had been with unspoken resentments and misunderstandings. Now there was a peace to it, a sense of shared experience that needed no articulation. "I've been thinking," Michael finally said, "about staying." Robert glanced at him, waiting for clarification. "Not just for your recovery," Michael continued. "I mean, longer term. Emily loves it here. She's blossoming with the dogs, with the space." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I think we both could use the family connection." The offer hung in the air between them, not just a temporary arrangement, but a fundamental restructuring of their lives. In the past, Robert might have seen it as an intrusion, a threat to his independence. Now he recognized it for what it was, a gift as unexpected and valuable as Bella's appearance at his gate. "What about your job?" he asked practically. "Your house in Virginia?" Michael shrugged. "I can work remotely most of the time. Maybe open a small office in Lancaster if needed." "As for the house," he trailed off, seeming suddenly uncertain. "Well, Emily and I have been renting since the divorce. No real ties there." Robert thought about the empty rooms upstairs, unused for years, about the garden that had flourished under Emily's care, about meals shared around the kitchen table with conversation and laughter, about the dogs who had brought life back into a house that had become little more than a mausoleum to the past. "This place is too big for just one old man," he said finally. "Always has been, since your mother passed." Michael's expression lightened with cautious hope. "Is that a yes?" Robert nodded, surprised by how right the decision felt. Yes, this is your home too. Always has been. The relief on Michael's face was palpable. Emily will be thrilled. She's already talking about painting her room. Her room? Robert raised an eyebrow. The blue bedroom upstairs. She says it has the best view of the sunrise. Michael smiled. Hope that's okay. The blue bedroom had been Michael's growing up. That his daughter had chosen it seemed fitting somehow, a continuation, a circle completing. It's perfect, Robert said. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Bella suddenly raised her head, ears perked toward the driveway. A moment later, headlights swept across the front yard as a car turned in. "Expecting someone?" Robert asked. Michael shook his head, rising to see who had arrived. The car parked, and Dr. Mitchell emerged, carrying what appeared to be a folder. "Sorry to come back so late," she called as she approached the porch. "But I found something at the clinic I thought you should see right away." She joined them, slightly breathless, and handed the folder to Robert. Inside was a copy of Franklin Miller's military service record, the official version, not the simplified one Jack Thompson had accessed. "I have a friend at the VA records office," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Asked her to pull Miller's complete file after we found that letter." Robert scanned the document, his eyes widening as he reached a particular section. "Distinguished Service Cross," he read aloud. "Second highest honor in the military, for extraordinary heroism in combat." He continued reading, his voice growing thick with emotion as he reached the citation description. "Sergeant Miller, despite being severely wounded himself, repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to rescue 3 Marines pinned down during an ambush. His actions, at great personal risk, directly saved the lives of these men and inspired his unit to continue the fight despite overwhelming odds." Robert looked up, meeting Michael's eyes. 3 Marines. The letter only mentioned me." "There's more," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "Look at the list of men he saved." Robert returned to the document, finding the names near the bottom of the page. "Corporal Robert Anderson, Private James Mitchell, Private Thomas Abrams." He looked up sharply at Dr. Mitchell. "Mitchell?" She nodded, a soft smile playing at her lips. "James Mitchell was my father. He never knew who pulled him out of that ambush, was unconscious the whole time. But he always said whoever did it gave me my life too, since he wouldn't have made it home to have a family without that rescue." The connection struck Robert with physical force. Dr. Mitchell, Sarah, wasn't just a veterinarian who had helped with the puppies. She was the daughter of a man whose life Miller had saved alongside Robert's. The circle widened, connections spiraling outward from that single act of courage decades ago. "And Abrams?" Robert asked, already suspecting the answer. "Dr. Abrams, your cardiologist," Sarah confirmed. "His father. When I realized the connection after finding Bella's tag with Miller's name, I called him. That's why he authorized your visit to the clinic even though it was against medical advice. He said his father would have wanted him to honor the man who saved his life." The revelation settled over Robert like a weight and a release simultaneously. All these years, he had carried the mystery of his rescue, the unnamed debt. Now he discovered that debt was shared, its ripples extending far beyond his own life. "Miller never told any of us," he said wonderingly. "Never claimed the recognition, never even made himself known." "Some debts can't be repaid directly," Michael observed, echoing a line from Miller's letter. "Maybe this, all of this," he gestured to encompass the house, the dogs, their gathered presence, "is how he finally allowed it to be acknowledged." As if in agreement, Bella pressed closer to Robert's side, her warm presence a tangible reminder of Miller's final gift. The 3 of them sat together on the porch long into the night, sharing stories that connected their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The past and present wove together into a new pattern, not erasing the difficult years, the separations and misunderstandings, but incorporating them into something stronger, more complete. Above them, the stars of a Lancaster County summer night wheeled slowly in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to the small miracle unfolding below. A family reconfiguring itself around love and need and unexpected grace, finding its way home. 6 months had passed since Robert's heart attack, and the Anderson property had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The house, once a static monument to the past, now pulsed with life and purpose. The faded "for sale" sign that had once stood at the end of the driveway had been repurposed. The reverse side now hand-painted with "Second Chance Shepherds" in bold letters, with a smaller line beneath reading, "In memory of Sergeant Franklin T. Miller, USMC." The crisp November air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as Robert made his morning rounds of the property. At 74, he moved more deliberately than he once had, but with a strength that belied his recent brush with death. Cardiac rehabilitation, a carefully monitored exercise regimen, and perhaps most significantly, a renewed sense of purpose had restored a vitality that had been absent for years. Bella walked beside him, her coat gleaming with health, her alert eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Behind them bounded Sergeant, now nearly full-grown and the spitting image of his mother, though with none of her disciplined restraint. The young dog raced ahead, circling back, then charging forward again in a pattern of exuberant exploration. "Sergeant, heel!" Robert commanded, his voice firm but affectionate. The dog immediately returned to his side, falling into perfect step, for approximately 10 seconds before another exciting scent drew him away. Robert chuckled, shaking his head. "Still working on that attention span, aren't we, boy?" They continued their circuit past the renovated barn that now served as a small training facility for the rescue operation they had established. Miller's legacy, both financial and philosophical, had provided the seed for what was quickly becoming Robert's second career. The safety deposit box had contained not only legal documents transferring ownership of Miller's property to whoever cares for Bella, but also a surprisingly substantial savings account and detailed journals about dog training techniques Miller had perfected over years of working with German Shepherds. Using these resources, along with Dr. Mitchell's professional expertise, they had established a modest rescue and rehabilitation program for German Shepherds in need. Currently, 3 rescued dogs occupied the refurbished kennels attached to the barn: a retired police dog with arthritis, a former fighting dog with trust issues, and a malnourished stray found wandering near the interstate. Each had a tailored training program, each was making progress, and each would eventually be placed with a carefully selected family. "Looking good this morning, Jackson," Robert greeted the arthritic police dog, who raised his graying muzzle in acknowledgement. "Sarah says that new medication is helping." The use of Dr. Mitchell's first name still felt slightly unfamiliar on Robert's tongue despite the increasingly personal nature of their relationship over the past months. What had begun as a professional connection had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated: a deep friendship founded on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the complex web of connections revealed by Miller's letter. As Robert completed his inspection of the kennels, ensuring that the overnight heaters had kept the dogs comfortable in the chilly autumn air, he heard the sound of tires on gravel. Right on schedule, Michael's SUV pulled up to the barn, his son emerging with a cardboard tray of coffee cups. "Morning, Dad," Michael called, nodding toward the main house. "Emily's already got breakfast started." "Sarah called to say she'll be by in about an hour. Had an emergency surgery first thing." The easy domesticity of the exchange, the casual coordination of their intertwined lives, never failed to fill Robert with quiet wonder. 6 months ago, he had been a solitary figure in an empty house. Now he stood at the center of a bustling household that somehow functioned smoothly despite its unconventional composition. Michael had made good on his proposal to relocate permanently. He had established a small architectural practice in Lancaster, specializing in sustainable design, and had enrolled Emily in the local school where she had quickly thrived. The blue bedroom upstairs was now unmistakably hers, decorated with dog posters, science fair ribbons, and the photographs she had begun taking with the camera Robert had given her for her 11th birthday. They walked together toward the house, Bella and Sargent ranging ahead of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frost-tipped grass, promising a clear, bright day ahead. "The contractor called about Miller's cabin," Michael said, handing Robert a coffee cup. "They've finished the renovations. Said we can do the final walkthrough whenever we're ready." Robert nodded, pleased by the news. The cabin had suffered moderate damage during the flood, but rather than simply repairing it, they had decided to expand and modernize the structure while maintaining its rustic character. The result would be a caretaker's residence for their growing rescue operation, a place where a full-time trainer could live and work with the more challenging cases. "Think we should head up there this afternoon?" Robert suggested. "If Sarah's free, she could come along, give her professional opinion on the kennel setup." Michael smiled slightly at his father's careful phrasing. The entire family, Emily included, had noticed the gradual shift in Robert and Sarah's relationship, though neither of them had put a label on whatever was developing between them. "I'm sure she'll make time," Michael replied. "She mentioned wanting to check the sight lines from the cabin to the kennels anyway." As they approached the house, delicious smells wafted from the kitchen window: cinnamon, coffee, and the savory aroma of bacon. Emily had discovered a passion for cooking in recent months, taking over breakfast duties with enthusiasm if not always perfect execution. "Fair warning," Michael murmured as they climbed the porch steps. "She's attempting Belgian waffles this morning. Had to run to the store at 6 a.m. for pearl sugar, whatever that is." Robert chuckled, oddly touched by his granddaughter's determination. "I'll eat them, even if they're burnt to a crisp," he promised. Inside, the house hummed with morning activity. Emily stood at the waffle iron, her face a mask of concentration as she carefully poured batter into the heated grid. Max, now moving very slowly in his advanced age but still present for all kitchen activities, lay hopefully near the table. The radio played softly in the background, Emily's preferred pop music rather than Robert's usual news programs, a compromise he had happily accepted. "Grandpa," Emily called, without taking her eyes off her culinary project. "Perfect timing. First batch is almost ready." Robert hung his jacket on the hook by the door, accepting the rhythm of a household morning that had become beautifully familiar. The kitchen table, once a lonely outpost where he'd read the newspaper in silence, now served as the family's central gathering place. School books and architectural drawings often mingled with veterinary journals and training manuals, a physical representation of their intertwined lives. Breakfast unfolded with the comfortable chaos of family life. Emily proudly serving slightly misshapen but delicious waffles, Michael reviewing his day's appointments, Robert sharing updates on the rescue dog's progress. Plans were made and adjusted, schedules coordinated, small domestic decisions navigated with the ease of people who had grown accustomed to considering each other's needs. As Emily cleared the dishes, insisting she could handle the cleanup alone, the doorbell rang. Bella immediately trotted to the front door, her posture alert but not alarmed. She recognized the visitor before they did. Robert opened the door to find Sarah Mitchell on the porch, her cheeks flushed from the morning chill. She carried her medical bag in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. "Sorry I missed breakfast," she said, stepping inside. "Mrs. Peterson's dachshund decided to tangle with a porcupine at dawn. 37 quills later, they're both going to recover, though I'm not sure the dachshund learned anything from the experience." The ease with which she shared this story, The assumption of their interest in her morning adventures spoke volumes about her place in their household. Though she maintained her own home and practice in town, Sarah had become a near-daily presence at the Anderson house, her professional expertise gradually blending with personal investment in their shared project. "Coffee's still hot," Robert offered, taking her coat. "Emily made Belgian waffles." "I'll take the coffee, but I ate at the clinic," Sarah replied, following him to the kitchen. She greeted Emily and Michael warmly, then placed the manila envelope on the table. "Got something interesting in the mail yesterday. Thought you all should see it." Robert opened the envelope to find a formal letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs, along with several official-looking forms. He scanned the contents, his expression shifting from curiosity to surprise. "They want to recognize Miller," he said, looking up at Sarah. "Posthumously. A ceremony at the Lancaster Veterans Memorial next month." Michael leaned forward, interest piqued. "What prompted this?" Sarah settled into a chair, accepting the coffee Emily poured for her. "Dr. Abrams and I might have had something to do with it. After we discovered the connection between our fathers and Miller's rescue mission, we contacted the VA about his Distinguished Service Cross. Turns out it was awarded but never formally presented. Miller refused the ceremony back in '71. "Sounds like him," Robert commented, remembering the reclusive man described in the journals. "Never wanted recognition." "Well, he's getting it now," Sarah said firmly. "They want all of us there. You, me, Dr. Abrams, as representatives of the families he saved. They're even installing a special plaque at the memorial." Robert sat back, conflicted emotions playing across his weathered face. On one hand, the recognition felt right, an acknowledgement of Miller's heroism and sacrifice. On the other hand, Miller himself had clearly avoided such public recognition during his lifetime. "What do you think he would want?" he asked Sarah, genuinely curious about her perspective. She considered this, absently stroking Bella's head as the dog rested her chin on Sarah's knee, a gesture of affection the German Shepherd reserved for only a few chosen humans. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that Miller spent his life believing he didn't deserve recognition, that saving those men was simply his duty, nothing extraordinary. But I also think that's precisely why he deserves to be remembered, not for his sake but for ours, for what his example teaches us about quiet courage and unassuming heroism." Robert nodded, finding wisdom in her assessment. "Then we'll be there? All of us." The morning continued with its usual rhythm, Michael departing for his office in town, Emily gathering her school materials, Sarah and Robert reviewing the care plans for the rescue dogs. By mid-morning the house had quieted, with only Robert and Sarah remaining to finalize plans for the afternoon visit to Miller's renovated cabin. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee cups refilled, reviewing the contractor's final report. The comfortable silence between them was punctuated only by the occasional comment about drainage systems or insulation ratings, practical matters that nonetheless carried the undercurrent of shared purpose. "You know," Sarah said finally, setting aside the blueprints, "when I first met you, that day you called about Bella and the puppies, I never imagined we'd end up here." Robert looked up, meeting her gaze. At 51, Sarah Mitchell carried herself with the confident competence of a woman who had built a successful practice through hard work and genuine care. Her auburn hair showed the first strands of silver at the temples, and laugh lines framed eyes that had seen both suffering and healing. Robert had come to value her direct manner, her practical compassion, her unassuming intelligence. "Where exactly is here?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than their physical location. Sarah gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the rescue operation, the complex web of connections that had formed between them all. Running a dog rescue together, planning memorial ceremonies, becoming... She paused, seemingly unsure how to define what they had become to each other. "Friends?" Robert suggested with the hint of a smile. "At minimum," she agreed, returning the smile. though I think Emily has other theories. Robert chuckled, remembering his granddaughter's not-so-subtle hints about Dr. Sarah being part of their family. Emily has an active imagination. She's not alone in her speculation, Sarah noted. Half of Lancaster County seems to have an opinion on our friendship. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. At 74, Robert had never expected to find himself in this position again, contemplating the nature of his feelings for a woman who was not Margaret. The thought brought a familiar twinge of guilt, quickly followed by the realization that Margaret herself would have approved of Sarah, would have wanted him to find companionship rather than solitude. "Does that bother you?" he asked carefully. "The speculation?" Sarah considered this, her practical nature evident in the thoughtful pause before she answered. "No, but I do wonder sometimes where this is going. What we're building here." The directness of her question was characteristic. Sarah Mitchell had never been one to dance around difficult topics, whether discussing a terminal diagnosis for a beloved pet or addressing the ambiguous nature of their relationship. "I'm not entirely sure," Robert admitted honestly. "Didn't exactly plan for any of this at my age." "Nor did I," Sarah replied. "My life was perfectly organized before you and Bella complicated everything." Her tone made it clear this complication wasn't unwelcome. Robert reached across the table, covering her hand with his, a gesture that had become more frequent between them in recent months. "Whatever we're building," he said quietly, "I'm grateful for it. And for you." Sarah turned her hand to clasp his, the simple connection carrying the weight of shared purpose and growing affection. "We should probably head up to the cabin," she said after a moment, practical as always, even as her eyes conveyed deeper emotions. "I've got appointments this afternoon." The drive to Miller's cabin took them along now familiar roads, winding through the Lancaster County countryside resplendent in its autumn colors. Robert drove his truck with Bella in the back seat while Sarah followed in her Jeep. The property, which had once seemed remote and isolated, now felt like a natural extension of the Anderson homestead, a satellite campus for their expanding mission. The cabin itself had been transformed. While maintaining its rustic character and connection to the landscape, the renovation had expanded the living space, added modern amenities, and incorporated purpose-built areas for dog training and rehabilitation. The contractor, a veteran himself who had known Miller, had taken particular care to preserve the cabin's essential spirit while making it more functional. "He'd approve, I think," Robert said as they toured the finished space. "Practical improvements, nothing fancy." Sarah nodded, inspecting the specialized kennels that had been built according to her specifications. "The sight lines are perfect. Whoever stays here will be able to monitor the dogs from both the living area and bedroom." They continued through the cabin, discussing final details and planning for the first resident trainer who would occupy the space. Robert had already interviewed several candidates, all veterans with dog handling experience, all recommended by the network of Miller's friends that had emerged in the months since his death. As they completed their inspection and stepped onto the cabin's expanded porch, Robert found himself drawing parallels between Miller's life and the direction his own had taken. The reclusive veteran had created a sanctuary here, not just for himself but for Bella, for the puppies that had come unexpectedly into his life. Now, Robert was extending that sanctuary, creating space for more animals, more humans in need of purpose and connection. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, noticing his contemplative expression as they stood looking out over the property. "Thinking about Miller," Robert replied. "How his choices led us here. How different things might have been if Bella hadn't found her way to my gate that day." Sarah leaned against the porch railing, her practical nature softening into philosophical consideration. "I've thought about that too. The chain of events. Miller saving our fathers in Vietnam, his heart condition, Bella finding you, your heart attack during the storm. So many points where things could have gone differently. Yet here we are, Robert said, gesturing to encompass not just the cabin but the entirety of what they had built together. Here we are, Sarah echoed, her voice carrying a note of wonder despite her usual pragmatism. They stood in companionable silence, watching as Bella explored the familiar territory of what had once been her home. The German Shepherd moved with purpose, revisiting favorite spots, checking boundaries, perhaps finding echoes of Miller in places only she could sense. She remembers, Robert observed, even after all this time. Dogs don't forget the important things, Sarah replied. Loyalty, love, connection, those memories are bone deep for them. As they prepared to leave, Robert took one last look around the cabin, at the photographs of Miller now displayed on the walls, at the dog training manuals arranged on the bookshelf, at the carefully preserved elements of the original structure now integrated into its expanded form. In a very real sense, Miller remained present here, his legacy continuing through their work. The weeks leading up to the memorial ceremony passed quickly, filled with the everyday demands of family life, the rescue operation, and Robert's continuing cardiac rehabilitation. November deepened toward Thanksgiving, bringing shorter days and the first hints of winter to Lancaster County. The night before the ceremony, Robert sat on the porch despite the chill, wrapped in a heavy jacket, with Bella lying at his feet. The stars shone with particular brilliance in the clear autumn sky, their ancient light a reminder of constancy amid change. The screen door creaked as Michael joined him, offering a mug of something steaming. "Hot cider," he explained, settling into the adjacent chair. "Emily's latest kitchen experiment. Actually turned out pretty good." Robert accepted the mug gratefully, the warmth seeping into his hands. "Where is our budding chef?" "Video chatting with her friend Kate about their science project. Something involving earthworms and soil composition." Michael shook his head with bemused pride. "She suddenly decided she wants to be a veterinarian. Wonder where that came from." Robert smiled, thinking of the hours Emily spent shadowing Sarah at the clinic, absorbing knowledge about animal care with remarkable focus for a child her age. Could do worse for a role model. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping cider and watching their breath form clouds in the cold air. The relationship between father and son had evolved over the months of living together, healing in ways neither had anticipated. Old grievances had been aired, misunderstandings clarified, new patterns established that respected both Robert's need for occasional solitude and Michael's more social nature. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Michael asked eventually. Robert considered the question. The memorial ceremony would be a public affair, representatives from the VA, local veterans, media coverage of the posthumous recognition. For a man who had valued his privacy as Robert did, such exposure might once have been deeply uncomfortable. "Not nervous," he replied honestly. "Just want to get it right, for Miller." Michael nodded understanding. "Emily's written something she wants to read, about Miller and Bella and second chances. Is that okay?" Robert felt a surge of pride and affection for his granddaughter. "More than okay. Think Miller would appreciate hearing from the younger generation." As they continued their quiet conversation, headlights swept across the yard. Sarah's Jeep pulled up, an unexpected visit at this hour. She emerged carrying what appeared to be a garment bag. "Sorry to drop by so late," she called as she approached the porch. "But I picked up your suit from the dry cleaners and thought you might want it for tomorrow." The thoughtful gesture, anticipating his needs, solving a practical problem before it arose, was characteristic of Sarah's approach to their relationship. She climbed the porch steps, handing the garment bag to Robert. "Thank you," he said, genuinely appreciative. "Completely slipped my mind." "I figured," she replied with a smile. "You've had a lot on your plate this week." Michael rose, taking his empty mug. Think I'll check on Emily. Make sure she's not planning to bring actual worms to Thanksgiving dinner next week. His transparent excuse to give them privacy brought knowing smiles to both Robert and Sarah. After he'd gone inside, Sarah took the vacated chair, declining Robert's offer of cider. "I can't stay long. Just wanted to make sure you were all set for tomorrow." "As ready as I'll ever be," Robert replied. "Emily's planning to speak, apparently." Sarah smiled. "She mentioned that at the clinic yesterday. She's been working on it all week. Wanted to make sure she got the science right about German Shepherd's intelligence and loyalty." The image of Emily meticulously researching for her tribute warmed Robert despite the November chill. So much had changed in the child's life this year. A move across states, a new school, the integration into what had once been an old man's solitary household. Yet she had thrived, her natural resilience and openness to connection helping her adapt to each new circumstance. "How about you?" Robert asked, turning his attention to Sarah. "Ready for tomorrow?" She nodded, though a shadow crossed her expression. "Been thinking a lot about my father. Wish he could be there to honor the man who saved him. He passed before any of this came to light." Robert reached for her hand, the gesture now natural between them. "He'll be there in his way." "Through you." Sarah's fingers tightened around his, accepting both the comfort and the truth of his words. They sat together in the gathering darkness, connected by touch and shared purpose, by the complex weaving of past and present that had brought them to this moment. The memorial ceremony the following day unfolded with dignity and genuine emotion. The Lancaster Veterans Memorial, a modest but well-maintained site near the center of town, had been prepared for the occasion with rows of chairs, a podium, and a discreetly covered plaque waiting to be unveiled. Robert sat in the front row with his family, Michael and Emily on one side, Sarah on the other. Bella lay at his feet, impeccably behaved as always in public settings, wearing a special vest that identified her as both a service dog and the living link to Franklin Miller. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, the sky a deep November blue that seemed to stretch into infinity. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. Representatives from the VA spoke about Miller's service record, his Distinguished Service Cross, his heroism in Vietnam. Dr. Abrams shared a letter from his father, now too elderly to travel, expressing gratitude to the Marine who had given him the chance to return home, to have a family, to live a full life. When it came time for Robert to speak, he approached the podium with steady steps, the notes he had prepared tucked in his pocket but ultimately unnecessary. He spoke from the heart about connection and duty, about debts that couldn't be repaid directly but could be honored through continued service to others. He spoke about Miller's choice to live quietly but purposefully, and how that example had ultimately changed his own life. "Franklin Miller saved my life twice," Robert concluded, his voice strong despite the emotion behind his words. "Once in the jungles of Vietnam, and again through the loyalty of his dog Bella, who led me back to purpose when I had lost my way. Today we honor not just his military service but the continuing impact of his quiet courage and compassion. The memorial we unveil today is made of stone and metal, but the true memorial to Sergeant Miller lives in the connections he created, the lives he touched, and the work that continues in his name." Emily's speech followed, surprisingly poised for a child her age, scientifically accurate in its description of canine intelligence and loyalty, but touching in its simple conclusion. "Mr. Miller saved my grandfather twice, which means he kind of saved me too, because without Grandpa, I wouldn't have found Scout, and without Scout, I might not have discovered what I want to do with my life." The unveiling of the plaque brought the ceremony to its official conclusion. A simple bronze marker that acknowledged Miller's military heroism, but also, at Robert's insistence, recognized his lifelong commitment to animal rescue and rehabilitation. It felt right that both aspects of the man would be remembered. As the gathering dispersed, many attendees approached Robert and Sarah, sharing stories of Miller's quiet assistance over the years, veterinary bills mysteriously paid, dog food anonymously delivered to struggling families, training freely offered to anyone who needed it. The picture that emerged was of a man who, despite his reclusive nature, had remained connected to his community through acts of practical compassion that he never sought recognition for. "He would have hated this," Robert commented to Sarah as they watched the last of the attendees depart. "All this attention." "Probably," she agreed with a small smile. "But sometimes, recognition isn't for the person being honored. It's for everyone else who needs the example." The wisdom of her observation struck Robert deeply. Miller's example of quiet service, of putting others' needs before his own comfort, of finding purpose in practical compassion, had transformed Robert's life. Perhaps, through this public acknowledgement, others might find similar inspiration. They returned to the Anderson house for a small reception, just family, close friends, and a few of the veterans who had known Miller. The gathering was subdued but not somber, marked by shared stories and a sense of continuity rather than conclusion. As evening approached and guests began to depart, Robert found himself on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunset paint the November sky in shades of gold and crimson. Bella and Max lounged nearby with Sergeant and the rescue dogs contained in their separate areas for the event. "Thank you," Robert said simply, "for everything today. For all of this." His gesture encompassed not just the ceremony, but the entirety of what had developed between them over the months since Bella had appeared at his gate. Sarah's practical nature softened in the fading light. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I was a girl, my father used to tell me that life has a way of circling back, that connections we think are broken often find ways to reform in patterns we couldn't have imagined." "Wise man, your father," Robert commented. "He was." Sarah turned to face him directly. "I think he would have liked you. And I think he and Miller and your wife would all approve of what we've built here." The mention of Margaret brought not the usual pang of grief but a sense of continuity, as if his life with her and his current reality were not separate chapters but parts of a continuous narrative, connected rather than divided by loss. "I think you're right," Robert agreed. He hesitated, then added what he had been considering for some time. "I've been thinking about making some changes to the house, the downstairs guest room, turning it into a more permanent space. For you, if you wanted." The invitation hung between them. Not quite a proposal, but more than a practical arrangement. Sarah studied him with the direct gaze that had become so familiar, so essential to his days. "Are you asking me to move in, Robert Anderson?" she asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Not exactly," he clarified. "More like creating space for possibilities. For whatever this is becoming." Sarah nodded, understanding the careful distinction. At their age, with their established lives and histories, conventional paths seemed less relevant than the authentic connection they had formed. "I'd like that," she said simply. "Space for possibilities sounds about right." As darkness settled over Lancaster County, lights came on in the Anderson house. Emily setting the table for dinner, Michael moving between kitchen and dining room with the easy familiarity of home. From the kennels came the occasional bark of the rescue dogs settling in for the night. On the porch, Robert and Sarah remained, their hands clasped in quiet acknowledgement of the journey behind them and the path ahead. Bella rose from her resting place, stretching luxuriously before coming to stand between them, her intelligent eyes moving from one to the other as if assessing and approving their connection. In the growing darkness, Robert could almost imagine Miller watching as well, not with regret for the recognition he had avoided in life, but with satisfaction that the connections he had forged continued to expand in ways even he could not have foreseen. The circle was complete, yet ever widening, like ripples spreading from a stone cast into still water, touching distant shores long after the initial splash has faded from memory. In saving those 3 men in Vietnam, Miller had set in motion a sequence of connections that had ultimately led to this moment, to family restored, to purpose renewed, to love rekindled in unexpected forms. Robert squeezed Sarah's hand gently, grateful beyond words for the starving German shepherd who had led him into the woods and changed everything. Some debts could never be repaid directly, but they could be honored through living fully in the second chances they provided. And in that living, in that honoring, lay all the meaning any life could ask for. When life seems to have written its final chapter, sometimes the most unexpected visitor can rewrite your entire story. In Robert Anderson's journey, a starving German shepherd led him not just into the woods, but back to life itself. At 68, Robert thought his purpose had ended with his wife's passing and his impending home sale. Instead, he discovered that our greatest contributions often begin when we think we have nothing left to give. Through Bella and her puppies, Robert rebuilt connections with his estranged son, formed a beautiful bond with his granddaughter, and found unexpected love with Sarah. His transformation reminds us that it's never too late for second chances, whether reconnecting with family, discovering new purpose, or opening our hearts to unexpected love. The debts we carry from our past often circle back as gifts, if we're brave enough to recognize them. Even in our most isolated moments, we remain connected through invisible threads of shared history and potential future. Has an unexpected encounter ever changed the direction of your life when you least expected it? What second chance are you most grateful for today? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be the very light someone else needs to find their way back home.